Welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Just to take note of the information about filming at meetings on the front of the agenda pack, and to say that the meeting's being streamed live and recorded by the Council for subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site. I'm going to ask members of the committee to introduce themselves. So I'm Matt White, and I'm chair of this committee. And to my right...
Hi, Councillor Pippa Connor. I'm Vice Chair of Overview and Scrutiny, and I chair the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee.
Good evening. I'm Councillor Adam Small, and I chair our Housing Development and Planning Scrutiny Panel.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Makbule Günes. I'm the chair of Environment, Culture, Community Safety Panel. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Councillor Anna Lawton and I chair the Children and Young People Scrutiny Panel.
Thanks, everyone. There are a number of officers and cabinet members present. I think in the interest of time, we'll ask them to introduce themselves or be introduced as they start to speak. That sounds more like it. Okay. Item 2, apologies. No. Technology isn't so accurate. Hello. 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 Okay. Right. I seem to be coming in and out, but for the moment it's working. Right. So I've not received. Hello. Hello. Okay, right. So I'll try again for the third time on item 2. Apologies for absence. Hello. Right. Apologies for absence. We've just received apologies for lateness from Councillor Gordon. That's all. Okay. Urgent business, item 3. No new items of urgent business. Item 4 is declarations of interest. So can members of the committee indicate if they have any declarations of interest to make? I can see none. Okay. No deputations questions received to my knowledge. Nobody here. Okay. So item 6 is minutes of this committee for the 20th of October 2025. So unless anybody has any points to raise on those minutes, are we happy to agree them as an accurate record? Yep. Is that agreed? That's agreed. Okay. Item 7, we've got minutes of scrutiny panel meetings for all 4 panels that took place in September. Can I just ask the members of the committee if they have any updates or any information regarding the meetings of their panels to give to the committee? Nothing. Okay. Oh, Councillor Ganesh.
There were 2 areas in our meeting that we requested further information, and that further information was not provided at the time of the meeting. So we requested again. So it might be the case that two items are still recommendation on 2 areas is outstanding. So we will do that in our next meeting.
Okay, thanks for that. So hopefully that information will be forthcoming to your panel. All right, that's noted. Thanks. Those minutes are just to be received and noted. So we're happy to do that. Okay, that's agreed. Thank you. Right. So item 8 is scrutiny of the budget and MTFS. And for this item, I'm passing over the chair to my colleague, the Vice Chair, Councillor Connor.
Thank you, Councillor White. Okay, so better. Hi. Okay, so start again. So I'm just going to briefly outline what we're going to be doing this evening. If there's any queries as we go through, please stop. And as we go through each item, I'm going to ask for recommendations, primarily because I won't remember all of them by the end of the meeting. So it's a lot easier to do it as we go ahead, as we go through. So we're doing the scrutiny of the overview and scrutiny budget first, and then we're going to take the MTFS second. So we're doing part A first. So we're actually starting on page 106 in your report packs. So this is appendix 3, and it's the Environment and Resident Experience Directorate. So that's the panel. And we are at the bottom of the page. I'm going to turn to it myself. Right. So, have a look. Sorry, at the bottom of page 105 in the pack, it says 2026-27 proposed new budget pressures. And at 1.4, it outlines what those proposed budget pressures are. And then it gives the overview and scrutiny panel. We've got 2 areas that we're going to be looking at. So before I go into this area, who is going to be speaking to this item I've got on my list? So we've got page 105, which is the Environment and Residents Experience Directorate. So would that be Councillor? No, that'd be Barry.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, absolutely, Chair. I can quite happily speak to you. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Curry Manovich and Greg Osborne, who will also support in any questions that the panel have got.
Brilliant. So as part of this, do you want to give a very quick update on what these 2 are, or do you want us just to read them out and look and ask questions?
I'll be guided by you. I'm happy to give an overview, but you may just want to jump into the questions if you have them.
Okay, right. So so I've got it as proposed. Why is it 106? So I've got proposed of new budget pressures. So we've got 2.1 million of proposed new budget pressures. So increase in bad debt provision against a shortfall in court cost recovery, £136,000. So is there anything within this that we should have been looking at before, you know, doing this in previous years? What's your sort of take on why particularly this figure? And is this something that we have been doing previously or should be currently doing more of?
So it is a historic and ongoing pressure. It's effectively a cost that we incur when we go through taking people to court. Effectively, so it's the cost of us or taking cases to court rather than people to court. I think is probably a better way to describe it. And costs that we incur in doing so that are not given back to us by the court through award, effectively. And our fees aren't adequate and haven't been adequate in order to cover those costs effectively. In terms of, is there anything that we could have done in order to change that? Well, as part of the forthcoming proposals around our future fees and charges, we are looking at altering the level of fees and charges in order to offset this as a pressure. If that's agreed, then actually this pressure disappears. So at the moment it's there because we haven't been through that process. So it is a risk. If, however, the proposals are agreed as part of the budget setting process, then it effectively disappears and will be corrected. But it is, as I say, it's a historic ongoing position that we've had as an organisation. But I think we're at a position where we've identified how to correct it. If we don't correct it, if it's not, then growth is required in order to offset it.
Can I just clarify on that then? So fees and charges are going to December cabinet, is that right?
That is correct.
Which,
yeah.
which means that the information that you're referring to will be published on Monday evening.
That's also correct. Yeah, that's where we are. So yes.
So this may not be a pressure that will, if that's agreed, then this pressure then disappears.
Absolutely. I mean, whilst we can't obviously prejudge any decision that Cabinet decide to take, but as it stands at the moment, with the proposals are accepted, that would right this pressure.
One of the reasons is because in Haringey, unlike in other boroughs, if we actually go to court for an order because people have fallen behind in their council tax, and as you will be aware, it's been in the press about the fact that all you have to do is fall behind for a very limited period of time, one payment, and then that will can trigger court proceedings. In Haringey, we do things a little bit differently. So first of all, even if we do go to court, we do allow, this is not to do with this, but we do allow people to then come back. They don't have to know. If they engage with us, we go back to a monthly payment. But also, if they engage with us and they are financially struggling, and that's the reason why they have ended up in this position, we can assess it, and sometimes we actually do not charge them the cost of us going to court. And so that is so that people's debt doesn't escalate. And so that's also one of the reasons that there hasn't been full cost recovery, is because the cost per case is averages out is a little bit higher as well, because we unlike a lot of other boroughs, if people are finding it really difficult and financially are struggling, we don't want to put them in more debt. So at that point in time, when people come to us, we actually have the discretion to not charge them those extra fees and to go into a payment plan for them to pay their council tax.
So thank you very much for that. But now I'm kind of hearing two different stories here, because what I'm hearing on one side is that we're moving towards full cost recovery on this. Does that mean that we're now no longer taking into account the kind of stuff that you're talking about?
Our cost recovery will move towards full cost recovery, and it will take account of this as well. What is the cost to the department of these cases on average? And we will be able to, in line with Rev Nicholson's case, we are able to actually evidence the cost that we are going to be charging for the court fees. As you know, there were the case in the previous case. We will be able to evidence this if there are any challenges in terms of court fees of what the cost is. Thank you. Sorry, it was acknowledged in that case that the cost was not necessarily just the cost of actually issuing the papers. You could take into consideration administrative costs, etc. But you did have to be able to evidence it if necessary. Thank you.
I mean, I suppose maybe we want to move to a recommendation on this that's to do with making sure that if we are moving to full cost recovery, which obviously that isn't in these papers, but that will be coming when we consider the budget as a whole in January, that we're not losing sight of the laudable aims that you were talking about in terms of not putting people in terrible financial circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. Anything else for that? No. Okay, thank you. That's really helpful to have cleared that. Oh, think this is going to be a funny one. Okay, so moving on to the second one, ongoing pressures relating to housing benefit overpayment.
Okay, thank you. So actually, I'm going to hand over to my colleague Greg just to talk through kind of the complexities of how the housing benefit system works. Effectively, it's well, I think you will know what it is as a system, but from an administration perspective, it's quite a complex part of the organisation in terms of both the determination and establishment around eligibility. If you're okay, Greg, to just quickly talk through where we are and what this particular pressure relates to, that'd be helpful.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah, Greg Osborne, Head of Revenues, Benefits and Tackling Inequality. So housing benefits is notoriously difficult to administer. There are numerous regulations which are set by national government around that. And one of the areas which we've seen growth in recent years is universal credit has taken over some of our housing costs from housing benefits, is we're left with supported exempt accommodation. These people are vulnerable and their rents have to include a degree of care within that one, and they also come with increased service charges as well. This has been a growth area over the years, and it's partly subsidised as opposed to fully subsidised, which we've seen with much of the housing benefits expenditure we have. Now, we may only receive part of this money back, but we have to provide the housing benefits for those qualifying cases. And we've seen areas in the past where this expenditure has been excessive, and we've reviewed our approach to this and the gateway in to make sure it's aligned with the regulations. And we've actually reduced our expenditure from 2 years ago significantly. We've made savings there, 1.1 million within the year, and we maintain that we still provide the best service for our residents, but at the same time we advise them where the benefit isn't suitable for them, and we would lose just pure subsidy by incorrectly administering that particular benefit, and we advise them where else they should be heading, which is generally universal credit. And we have received £3.3 million growth in prior years to cover this growth area. And then to recoup that, there was a recovery effort of 1 million per year applied to it. Unfortunately, we can't consist with that 1.0 million reduction year on year because the area isn't reducing itself. Whilst we have made efforts and have made savings, we're effectively asking to reverse that reduction. And then because of rent increases, which are experienced through the natural nature of this, we're asking for a slight increase of 1.2 million. Also involved with this is other areas of growth where housing benefit overpayments, we used to actually be able to make money on this, but because we're losing working age claimants, we aren't also seeing housing benefit overpayments because we don't have the caseload anymore. And as a result, not being able to create a 40% increase on that, we're losing some subsidy there, which is also increasing our bad debt provision. That's incorporated into the £1.2 million increase.
Thank you, Greg. We've also got Councillor Chandwani on the call if anyone wants to ask questions related to Cabinet Member, but is there any questions on this? Councillor Small.
Thank you. I just don't understand. I'm sorry. I don't understand the direction of travel of each bit of money. What we need, there's an overspend of 1.3 million in order to not avoid the 1.3 million is to cover the statutory costs, and then that will produce a saving of 1 million. I just didn't follow. I'm sorry.
My apologies. Thank you for the question. There's a reduction on our budget of 1 million for next year. We're asking to reverse that because our budget saving won't be achieved. In fact, our expenditure is expected to go up. So I think it's an overall budget of 1.7 million was due to drop to 700,000, and we needed to go back up to close to 2 million overall.
Sorry, Councillor Small, if I just explain as well. So the government, we administer housing benefit on behalf of the government, and they have a formula that kind of is a one size fits all blanket type formula of funding councils to do this piece of work. And sometimes it's great because the formula, the amount of claims that a borough has and how much it would cost that borough to administer and the formula will fit. Unfortunately, we're not one of those boroughs. We have a higher number of housing benefit claims still, and therefore we're having to spend extra money to cover that cost. And we were hoping that we would see some of those costs go down because people will migrate to universal credit. And so, but it doesn't look like that those projections are still there. And one of the reasons for it is we still have a lot of residents who they might be on universal credit, but they still claim housing benefit for various reasons. They could be of pension age, so they're not allowed to have universal credit. They could be in sheltered accommodation, supported accommodation. And so we still do have a few people on there. And I guess Greg has explained the rest of it. I know this is really complicated and I really appreciate it.
So I was going to, sorry, Councillor Moore, did you want to come back? Because I'm too, I'm a bit confused. So I just wanted to clarify something as well. So, but if you want to come back, please do.
Do you want to clarify this?
Okay. So thank you. I mean, I think it's just getting my head around that we're needing to put in, take out, put in. It just seems a bit sort of, I'm just not quite sure where we're at. And it just says we're reducing housing benefit overpayment recovery. So does that mean we're going to get money back because we're not overpaying as much? And then the other bits I've got, so without this adjustment, the council faces full cost overspend of 1.13 million and the previously planned 1 million will not be achievable. So are we still planning on trying to achieve that £1 million saving by putting this extra 1.3 million in? I'm sorry, Carrie.
So housing benefits is fundamentally changed because of the migration to universal credit. And it used to be the case that councils could actually generate a small surplus on their housing benefit budget. And that was because the DWP subsidised overpayments that we created that were not overpayments due to our fault. And we could also claim that full overpayment recovery back from the resident. And so we would potentially generate a surplus. Those days have gone because of the migration to universal credit. And so the original growth that was put into this budget was 3.3 million to rectify that significant shift from the migration over to universal credit, and the fact that our opportunity to generate that surplus had completely evaporated, and we now actually needed a budget because, as Councillor Chandwani said, our full expenditure on housing benefits is not covered by the government. And there are specific categories of spend that are not covered. And the most significant one is supported exempt accommodation, where we get 40% back or 60% back. So that leaves us with a massive hole in our budget. And therefore the council's general fund has to cover that. And that's what the growth was put in for. So we did our very best forecasts to anticipate what the size of the supported exempt accommodation spend would be, but we are at the mercy of how many compliant applications come in, and we have to approve every compliant application, and so that budget may go up or down and we have no control over it, which means that, you know, this is a volatile budget and we're making our best guess about what the budget needs to be in future years. And our guess kind of a year ago has had to be revised, and we've had to request another million so that we're not overspent next year.
Right. So I think you're saying is that you don't actually have control over this situation because you're not getting the funding from government that would cover the full costs. Therefore, this is a fluctuating budget, and hence you're asking for more money at this point in order to fulfill your statutory obligations.
Exactly that.
Any other questions on this? Okay, as it's to fulfill statutory obligations, I'm not really sure there's much we can. Councillor Small.
I'm sure this is explored, and I'm sure this is a frustration of all local authorities across the country. It seems incredibly aggravating that this is a cost for us to bear. So the only recommendation would be to continue to lobby to get the DWP to cough up. But I don't know if that's already happening. But yeah.
Well, we can put it in as a recommendation anyway, and yes, I'm sure that will definitely be taken up. Councillor Lawton.
Sorry, just on that point, is it a standardised percentage across the board, as in terms of what we're getting, that all councils are getting that same percentage? So yeah, and that's got no difference, as it were, if we have lots of people on that or less people, or no? Okay, and I suppose following from Councillor Small's comment, it might be a more political question, but is there any movement to lobby against this being sitting in our budget, or is it kind of accepted as realistically the way things are right now? What do you credit?
Sorry, I don't think so. I think one of the problems is that so the percentage is the same. So nobody's turning around and saying Haringey is only going to get 60% and another borough is going to get 80%. So the percentages are the same. It's the quantity that might be different. We might have more people in our borough compared to another borough that needs supported exempt accommodation, for example, or there could be more suppliers in our borough supplying supported exempt accommodation. So there's all of those kind of variables that are not there. In terms of the
which in real terms, though, is us coughing up more money than
absolutely.
Another borough.
So if we had 500 people in supported accommodation and Bexley had 20, then obviously their value will be different to ours. The government are aware of this. So when they've done the universal credit migration and they were going to take over all of the housing costs directly, when they realised how complicated and expensive it was to do all of the other kind of normal rent payments, they said, no, actually, no, we won't cover that from universal credit. You guys can carry on. So they clocked that pretty fast. And then, but also housing benefit isn't something we can go back to the council and say, do you know what, we don't want to do this for you anymore, because it's a statutory obligation. So I don't know how to say this politely, but I think we're getting conned. And so we are making those pleas to central government, because it is just coming out of our general fund. There's no budget for it, there's no funding for it. And I think as well, if we're really determined, and this is a political answer, if we're determined to make sure local government is funded properly, that's great, but also to make sure that they're not paying for things that they're not spending is probably be a better way as well, because we could use this money on other things.
I agree with Councillor Small's recommendation to push for this to be pushed as far up as it can. Is there anything, do anyone want to add to that recommendation? No? Okay, thank you. That was a slightly complicated section, but we got there in the end. But thank you very much for both of you and Barry for helping to get us through that part. Okay, so we're now on to the next page, which is page 107. These are proposed to save proposals for 26, 27. So it's at 1.9 in your pack, and then it's a 12,000 of investment is required to provide proposed projections of 63,000 as proposed on the table below. So just so you know, on page 130 in the pack, which is almost impossible to read. I've got it up on my laptop, so I've enlarged it. I have got an A3 one printed out, but to be fair, it doesn't really help very much. But it is a bit tricky. So I don't know if you can read. So the one thing I would just say is when we're doing this in future, please can we have pages that we can actually read? I know people like to have it all on one page, but yes, unless you magnify it on your laptop, it's very difficult. So at page 107, which is the digital onboard push, which is the more succinct version, and then at page 130, it's there's more explanation going into it. As not everyone has got a laptop in front of them, Barry, are you able just to sort of summarise for the panel? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so okay, so this is effectively an attempt to transition people from paper billing to e-billing effectively. So the investment is to pay for a campaign to help assist with that transition, which is a range of measures around helping to promote the self-service and promote sign up to my account and the use of the e-billing service. And the benefit of that effectively is transitioning people that we know already definitely have emails and online access because they're already registered with us, to make that transition onto an e-billing platform rather than still using the paper system. And effectively, the savings come through the efficiencies that are created within that in terms of processing hours across the council tax service, making the team more efficient and freeing up some of the sort of overtime costs and vacancy costs that there are in there at the moment, which is about equivalent to roughly about half an FTE across that part of the service.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor White.
What evidence have you got about how this is going to work? And we're not just going to spend the money and we're not going to generate the savings. We're not going to have the people moving online because they're just not going to get around to it. They're not going to see the adverts. They can't be bothered.
Yeah, thank you. So the evidence which we've got is other boroughs have got reasonably high take up with a similar demographic to ourselves. We've also looked into the actual savings provided, and that's purely on postage. We also have a list of the e-forms which are available to customers and the lack of take up on those. And we think it's due to awareness, purely because the number of emails which we have on the accounts is 2/3 of the number of accounts have got emails held against them, but they're not taking advantage of it. So we think it's an awareness aspect. And equally, numerous other benefits which people engage with. Anything that's DWP led has to be done online. So we don't think that there's an inhibition to use this. I think it's simply a case that people aren't aware. And we're also, thanks to Councillor Chandwani, been made aware that people who have signed up to my account, which enables them to go on to this, haven't then gone and signed up to e-billing. They weren't aware that it was an additional thing to do, something else which we're trying to address within this. So there's another campaign to try and improve the take up of my account, and also this will be incorporated into that. So it'll be a two-flow thing.
I suppose my question is more like in terms of individuals or residents who are digitally excluded, or like they're kind of digitally not, they don't prefer to use digital equipments, and certain generation and maybe members of global majority communities tend to be computer shy. So I just wanted to make sure, like, how do we make sure people who are like kind of dead against it or feel like they cannot operate within that system are going to be given opportunities and alternative? Of course, it's like we need to look into every area and where savings can be made. Why not? Majority of residents can easily sign up and use that, but those that couldn't or wouldn't, what are we going to do with them?
Can I respond? Is okay? Yeah. So we deliberately haven't put in the proposal 100% take up for exactly that reason. We've looked at where people are digitally engaging with us and used that to help estimate and build what we think the saving is worth. So we're not including people in that sort of cohort who are not engaging with us effectively digitally for exactly that reason.
Sorry, I just wanted to check. This is by email we're talking about?
No, it's like the sort of e-billing account rather than an email. So it's having an online account to access all of your bills.
Is that something you can do through an app on your phone?
You can use a web browser on your phone. I think there is an app actually. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. As long as it's phone.
It's definitely mobile friendly. Yeah.
Mobile friendly. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Chandwani. Well, remember very recently I got told off for also not being signed up to e-billing, so I'm glad the campaign started early. I actually have another a slightly opposite point to Councillor Gunesh, which is it seems slightly modest, 40%. I think it absolutely seems like a common sense thing to do to move people more digitally. As you say, DWP expects people to, and I think in almost every other walk of life. I appreciate sort of being sensible with it, but is there more ambition we can put behind it to save some more money and get more people signed up digitally?
Yes, essentially, we're only asking for a small amount upfront to run a single campaign. On the back of that campaign's success, then we'll improve the way we deliver it. So yes, there certainly is appetite to increase that number, but that is purely the figure we expect off this single campaign.
I had one very last quick question. It was in the news recently about cyber attacks on councils. So obviously this is more, and this is obviously not, it wasn't Haringey, but so with this, becoming more of an issue and people genuinely becoming a little bit more worried, how confident are you in our current cyber protection systems that if a cyber attack happened, that actually this would be a protected sphere? I don't know quite what you call it in IT terms. So a protected space.
I think it would be useful actually in terms of cyber digital, which comes under me and comes under Taran. I will hand over to Taran, but what I will say is that we don't in digital talk about if we have an attack, we talk about when there will be an attack, because everybody, like the attacks, I just Googled cyber attack to try and find out what was going on. I got all these cyber attacks all over the world on like all kinds of authorities. So it does happen everywhere. What I am assured by is that we have a very, very good, very experienced team in digital who lead in London on this. So although there are things that we can improve, in actual fact, we do have a very, very good and strong team in Haringey on this. I'll hand over to Tara.
Thank you, and it's quite topical at the moment as well, isn't it? And I would just echo really what Councillor Carlin has said, that it's a high risk on our risk register, and I would expect every local authority puts behind the risk register. You can never eliminate it altogether just because of the world that we operate in, but we've got really robust plans in place. As Councillor Carlin says, a very strong team. We've taken, a range of different precautionary measures, but equally business continuity plans and emergency response plans for should an event happen as well. So, but we are keeping those under constant review. It's an area that you can never quite have enough in place. So that's what we're doing. We regularly assess ourselves against kind of various frameworks to make sure that we have got everything in place that we have. But as I say, very, very, very responsive team that takes immediate action when there is any risk. But we can come back and give a bit more detail. I should have expected that question, shouldn't I? But yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Lawson.
Sorry, I just want to actually push slightly further on Councillor Small's point, because I feel that I understand it's just one campaign, but we are spending quite a bit of money on said campaign to save the money, and I just wonder if it does just feel to me sort of low in ambition in terms of spending that money. And then I hear what you're saying about it being one campaign, but realistically, are we going to keep doing lots of different campaigns? And if we are, do we really see that there's going to be some people this time who go, nah, but on the second campaign say, that's a great idea? Because it doesn't seem to me like it's something that is going to have like huge social chat around it. You're not going to kind of go down the pub and go, by the way, guys, you should all do this, and then it's going to snowball. So for me, it seems like if we're spending that money, we should actually almost have a higher ambition, because I just feel that the world is so digital now. And yeah, I don't want to push sort of further than my colleague, but I actually feel like there's, like Councillor Gunnar said, there's going to be some that will never do it, but actually most surely now should be doing this.
If I can respond, I think you're right. Look, as Greg said, we've got an ambition to have as many people on e-billing as possible, and that goes without saying. I think the piece of work is needed. We do know that there are people that digitally engage with us and that are not using this system. So I think that there is definite potential to move people over. What I think it would be reckless to do, though, is to overestimate that for the purposes of looking at what our finances are. And I don't want to set up a position that is then unachievable. because we have just overestimated or been perhaps too optimistic about what we can do. We haven't tested this yet. As we said, as Greg said, we've certainly seen success in other boroughs, but we haven't done it yet. And I am also just acutely aware of just the complexities of our communities. And I don't know at this stage just how far that reach can actually come. So I think I'd like to say it's prudent. I don't think it is prudent. I think it's probably accurate, but we will see. But it's certainly not overestimating.
Thank you. So I'm wondering about whether a recommendation is that we've asked for tracker before for OSC, but I think this is the first step. So I think it'd be really helpful next year to see how that's going, and actually then we could maybe push and ask, oh, hang on a minute, there was a push here to sort of see if we could, whether we might need to invest a bit more, that'll all come in as part of the mix. So I think that'd be really helpful to see it being tracked through, and a bit more information on cyber security as part of that for the next iteration would be great. Anything else on that one? Nope. Okay, so we're now moving on to page 109. Proposed new budget pressures. So this is Appendix 4, Culture, Strategy and Communications, and we're at the bottom. So it's the proposed new budget pressures, and that's the election costs, which is actually over on page 110. So if you go over the page, we start with the election costs, and this is, I think, a proposed new budget pressure of 3.3 million has been identified from 2026 through to 2031, 2 million in 26-27, and that's summarised on the table below. So we'll just go through this in order. Election costs. I'm going to ask a really obvious question. Was this expected? Was this amount of money expected on election costs? Because this is something that we would.
No, it's absolutely expected, but it's in the budget because it's not something that comes in every year. So we don't. The local elections is expected, but it's not something that we. It's a pressure on the budget for next year because there's going to be an election next year. We don't have an election every year. We hope. We did go through a period where we did, but we hope we don't get an election every year. And so this is the cost of running the election. And
thank you, and thank you to officers for coming. So I've got Jess and I've got Councillor White.
Just if it's helpful to add to this, as Councillor Collins said, some boroughs put aside a certain amount every year to work up to their cost every 4 years of their local elections. Obviously, other elections we're compensated by the authority, whether it's the GLA or the government. But for our own elections, we have to make provision for that. And other authorities do it in different ways. They put in a certain amount aside to build up to the total. We just account for it in the year. We had there was already an amount set aside, so this is an extra pressure. We've done a full sort of piece of work based on our experience of running elections more recently than the previous local elections. So we think this is a more realistic budget now, and it does take account of holding the count at Alexandra Palace, which is more expensive than the previous venue, which was Tottenham Hotspurs, but that was not a satisfactory venue from a sort of security and ease of management of the count. So that's why there is increased costs. Would say though we have negotiated favourable rates from Alexandra Palace. It is a bigger venue, and that goes along. That's part of the thing that drives the extra costs. But that's why it's showing there. So we had made a provision, but we've now done more recent, more robust estimates. So that's why we're asking for this extra, and it obviously comes out the subsequent year.
Thanks. So yeah, my question basically along those. I mean, you've kind of gone some way to answering my question, but really, so the previous allocation for 26-27 was 550,000, which is why we've got, and the expected cost is 1.23 million, which is more than twice as much, which is why we've got the additional 680 in 26-27, and then the full 1.23 million in 2030-31, which was, so why is it so much more? Why is it way more than twice as much the cost? How much of that is because we're going for a more expensive venue? It seems like a much more expensive, because there are other costs. It's not just the count venue, so that surely can't be more than just a bit of the extra cost. Why was the previous estimate so way out?
So Tottenham Hotspur was considerably cheaper. I mean, much less than half the price of Alexandra Palace. I think it was. I mean, I wasn't here for the last election. I believe it was. They managed to negotiate it a kind of. A bit of a last minute deal, but it was unusually cheap the last time. So that is a large part. There are absolutely other costs that have gone up. So part of that is the increase in Royal Mail costs for all the election postage we have to do. So the price of stamps has gone up a lot in the last couple of years, and so that is part of the increase from previous years. I think there were a number of disadvantages to doing it at Spurs. Which it was effectively held, I think, in the, I mean, some of you will recall better than me, but it was held, I think, in the sort of bit that goes around the outside of the pitch. It meant it was not possible to have visual oversight of the whole count, which is really undesirable from a point of view of just keeping an eye on exactly what's going on. So the returning officer and deputy returning officers were constantly sort of running up and down the different thing to make sure they could see what was going on. I think it was really quite unsuitable. Some of the part of the count had to take place in the brewery, so strong smell of beer. Places like sort of Chicken Shack. So I mean, it's not really a very ideal place to be doing a count. I think they also had feedback from the political agents, party agents, that it also made it difficult for them to see exactly what their tellers and agents were doing. And the other thing to always bear in mind, I mean, sometimes it's less of an issue but Spurs are doing well last year. But if they hadn't been knocked out in 2022, there would have been a home game at Spurs that week, which would have meant that we would have been kicked out, and so the council would have been looking for a count venue with, like, you know, a couple of weeks' notice. So there's a lot of risks and a lot of downsides to Spurs, and that's why you know, the cost is a factor, but we've worked really hard to minimise the extra costs. But it is a much better venue from a sort of security of account point of view.
Thanks. You're putting a lot of emphasis on the cost of the count venue. So what proportion of this total cost is the cost of the count venue? And maybe that's something you'd come back to us with more of a breakdown.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that.
And then another question there would be, so you're saying that costs of some things like postage, etc., have gone up since the last election. So the previous amount wasn't enough, but then we've put the same amount in the budget for 2030-31. Presumably we're not expecting the cost of postage to be the same in 2030 as it is in 2026. Yeah. We surely must be expecting some kind of inflation in those kind of costs. So why are we not putting more in? Weren't we putting an inflation estimate into that budget?
I mean, I think it would be open for us to do that. It's only it's a projection at the moment. I suppose we wouldn't really be basing it on anything. It would be a sort of finger in the air. We could apply a general inflation type number to the figure, but I think we would be still doing the same sort of, you know, rebudgeting and replanning closer to the time that we've done this time round. So I think, you know, maybe closer to 2030 we would have a more robust estimate, but, you know, I guess we could put in an inflation uprated figure forecast.
Two things on that latter point. Actually, I was questioning whether the civic centre was, you know, or whether we have alternative spaces, or whether actually there's merit in trying to predict 5 years ahead, or 4 years ahead, what the costs would be, and therefore I would, you know, personally rather that a figure of assuming from last time and working closer to the time is probably more advantageous. But the first question I had was I think it was the general election, where we combined our count with, it was Enfield or Barnet or one of the two, and whether we're making any efforts to try and bring in other local authorities to recover some of the costs of running it, and saying Ali Pali's a massive venue. If we're opening it and we've got different spaces, could we recover some of the costs by offering spaces for them?
Yes, and yeah, absolutely. And we do that obviously for the GLA, which is, you know, where we're combined together, and for general election counts as well. I think the issue really with local elections is that boroughs like to be local and they like to have a local thing. And for other boroughs, there's obviously a lot more sort of transport costs, and it's much less convenient not to do it in their borough. So they're kind of reluctant, if they don't have to come to other places. And of course, with the general election counts last year, we did have to bring, you know, because there were wards from other boroughs that were part of our constituencies, and so there was a lot of moving votes around. And there's another thing with the sort of security of election counts, that returning officers don't like to move votes around, as you know, they like to move votes as little as possible, just from a sort of security point of view. So I think there would be reluctance from other boroughs to kind of up sticks and come to us. But I mean, it's a fair challenge, and boroughs should always, I think, do more things collaboratively. So we can put it to them. But as I say, I think there'd be some reluctance.
Okay, this is a very popular item. We're going to go Councillor.
Well, I suppose only because it's the item we're most directly involved in increasing costs, and it's a shame. I suppose I just wanted to, say on a kind of more recommendation basis, can we look at, because I hear you on the borough thing, but actually we don't know. And what if they have venues like Tottenham Hotspurs that aren't working very well for them, but it's all they've got, or are costing them a fortune, and they've got council budget pressures themselves. And I think until we've done that work and can come back to scrutiny and actually say we've tried and it doesn't work, I think we should be trying. It's a huge venue, it's clearly a huge cost. And then on that, could we have more breakdown of the election costs going forward? Because I still feel sort of unclear on where the little bits of money that we could be saving is going. So it'd be good to say thank you.
Yeah, no, I picked that up from Councillor White. I was going to add that one in, but yeah, no, absolutely. Breakdown of the costs, as well as the other bit. Councillor Guinness, did you want to add anything to recommendation?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I mean, between the last local election and this one, we had number of by-election in between. So have we factored in like adding additional resources just in case if there were to be by-election in between, and or how do we sort of pay for that cost?
So because by-elections are obviously smaller, we can manage those within our own venues. So the costs are more minimal. They're related to the kind of polling stations and staffing costs. So we tend not to budget for extras. We obviously hope that there won't be too many, but it's because it's an unpredictable thing. So it's one of the things that we have contingency for, and so it's one of the things the returning officer will go and ask for application from contingency to cover the costs. I should say that whilst we absolutely do have a very detailed breakdown of the election budget, I probably need to just check with the returning officer, because technically it's his budget rather than the council's. It's because it is a separate operation, although we organise it from election services, which sits in my directorate. The actual ownership of it is the returning officer, and he's a separate entity to the council, which is kind of slightly odd thing. So I probably need to just check with the returning officer before releasing it, but I can't see there would be a reason not to. But
all right, I'm going to move us on. But Councillor White, did you want to just finalise?
I didn't want to lose what
Yes.
Councillor Small said about the new civic centre, and whether that would be I don't know whether it's large enough or there's a large enough space there, but we can just consider that maybe that would save us a lot of money on counts.
I mean, the chamber is going to be, you know, a very flexible space that could be cleared. Yeah, we'd have to go and have a look when it's all in situ as to whether it would cover a whole count. But yeah, I agree, that would be the ideal.
Right, well, that's quite positive. So yes, okay, so that's the recommendations for that part. We've got removal of unachievable advertising income targets. So this is 200,000. I noted, so it's at 1.6 in your papers on page 110. So yes, there was a stretching target of 770,000. We had another extra member of staff for 6 months, but only 400,000 was achieved last year. So we've got a more realistic target of 550. Does anyone want to ask any questions on this area, Councillor Small?
Just some details as to we think why we weren't able to achieve it, even with the extra push.
Shall I come in, Chair? So I think lots of reasons. I think the income targets have gone up very steeply just in the last sort of few years. So back in 22-23, the target was 372k. So you can see it's really more than doubled in just sort of 3 years. So I think it was a steep hill to climb. There's only really one member of staff who sort of leads on this in comms. We did give them the extra person. I don't think that capacity didn't work out and it didn't really lead to the additional income that we'd hoped for. I think we're always trying. It is a very competitive market. There's a sort of saturation point you reach. We've got a lot of sort of on-street advertising. As you know, we now have the big wrap around River Park House, which does mean that, although we only made 400k last year, we're forecasting more like 500k this year, largely as a result of the success of the big wrap. So we're constantly looking for different opportunities, but it was, I think it was just too steep a hill to climb. And I should also say that we've also got across the whole council, there are also other income targets in other services, and there's a sort of wider corporate income generation project, so which the member of staff who's responsible for this target in comms is also working on. So I think it's just a matter of pressure and capacity, and not being able to do as much as was originally envisaged. So rather than carrying just a constant unrealistic target, that's why we're asking for it to be reduced. Obviously, we will try and overachieve, but if we do, then that will contribute to the corporate income target, I would suggest as well.
Thank you. Sorry, but just to be clear, it's not about a resource or capacity issue going in. It is about just the realization of the commercialization. I'm slightly less concerned in this area, but a lot of what the council is trying to do is around the commercialization of our property and so on. As we're just trying to get a picture of actually whether we hit sort of a market limit where the demand didn't really meet our hope or expectations, or whether at the minute we just don't have enough resources going in to take of the market that is there.
I think it's a bit of both, if I'm honest. I think we are quite stretched, but say we did try the kind of extra resource. Now, maybe it was the wrong kind of resource, and as part of the corporate income generation project, we are looking at what would be the right sort of resource that could drive additional income. But the reason why the wrap on River Park House is a big income earner is because of the footfall in Wood Green. So we are limited for the sites that are in our ownership that also have footfall, that are also suitable for advertising to go up on. And so, yeah, there is a limitation to them. But because this wrap has been successful, the partner that we're working with on that is interested in other sites because it's been a good experience for them. And so we are looking for other options, but it is about footfall. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to ask Councillor Small if you want to make any recommendations based on what you've heard today around the realistic aspect of the proposals, or are you happy? Okay, any other recommendations?
I didn't have a recommendation. I had a question about how this is being presented to us. I don't know if I'm wrong, but I feel like what we're showing, how this was being previously presented to us, was kind of among the proposed savings as an income. Am I wrong in that? But I feel like in previous savings rounds, we've had a kind of like, okay, this is a positive to the budget. It's an income generation thing. So why is it now being presented to us as a pressure rather than as an element of the non-delivered savings? And is it possibly? I just wanted double check that it's not also being counted among the non-delivered savings, and we're not going to see an example of double counting here.
Yeah, so if I could just come in on that one, and actually I should say on this particular line, if you go back over previous year's budgets, we were very specific around how we were going to generate that income. And I think what kind of Jess has described is, you know, those very specific options that we put forward in previous budgets, and some of them are now no longer achievable. Doesn't undermine our real drive to be more commercial and generate income. We're just saying that those specific areas are the areas that are quite limited. And we're trying to be open and transparent, really. So if you go back to say the last update that you saw in July, actually the 26-27 budget for those income budgets would have assumed an additional 200k of income in 26-27 that the team would generate. The reason so that's what the numbers would have shown in the MTFS. Why it's showing as a pressure is we're saying that's no longer achievable, and therefore the numbers you saw in July, we need to essentially give 200k more to the budget to be able to get it back to kind of almost a break-even position. So hopefully that helps, because I can see why at one point, you know, in the year that it was put forward, it would have been presented as a saving proposal, and it's already therefore assumed to come out the budget in 26-27. What we're saying is that isn't the case now, so we need to build 200k back in to the budgets for next year.
Yeah, so but the point, does my point about double counting make sense? That if we're building 200 in here, but is that not double counting? But we're also saying that the proposed
It won't be double counting. So if we are essentially writing off some savings, so previously approved savings, they should be coming through as a pressure. That's how we would be open and transparent about it. So there isn't, I mean, we will do the quadruple checks before the budget actually hits next year to make sure that there isn't a double count. But I suppose maybe previously we would have just presented it as a total line of non-delivered savings. Actually, what we're trying to do now is be quite specific about the ones that we think are not achievable.
I say just in this year, it's just showing as an overspend and a pressure in my budget because I'm not achieving the target this year.
I think over many years we have asked for, you know, targets in this area, haven't we? And I think it is a difficult area to try and generate the amount that you've been asked to do. So I think again, it's about the tracker, and I think seeing that tracker for the following year and just seeing if actually this was achievable, because then it helps us. I just want to make a very quick point where we are spending a lot of time. In fact, we've only got 10 minutes left for the entirety of this section, but it's because so I think just a little bit more information in the pack for us so that we know where to hone in on very specifically, rather than trying to quite work out what exactly is going on. I think would be really helpful. And then the time management, I think, would be a lot easier. And I know you will want to go home at some point this evening, so I am just putting that there as a positive. You know, we can. Our service levels. When you say service levels, what exactly did you mean by service levels? Sorry, I wasn't quite sure what that actually meant.
So it's the current HR establishment, the service that's provided to manage our workforce. The workforce hasn't gone down. But what has changed is the proportion of the workforce that is within the HRA compared with the general fund. And so it's just, and we charge the costs of the HR service according to the number of staff that the HR service supports, which is a rational way of doing it. So it's really, it's not about the service costing more. It is about just changing the way we're paying for it, just effectively from another account, because we're proportionately, the service is supporting proportionally a larger proportion of the workforce in the general fund compared with the housing service.
Sorry, I don't understand why though, because if we're maintaining a service level, that seems to suggest that the workers, the work hasn't disappeared. It's just, as you said, they're now in the general fund. But if the work hasn't disappeared, surely the HRA is supposed to cover that work and those workers. I could understand if we had moved workers out, they were now not doing anything related to the HRA, they're doing something different, and that general fund now is taking those workers on to do something else. But if they're doing HRA work, why is the HRA not still taking those costs?
It is. I know it's confusing. I suppose it's about the proportion of the work that is generated by the HRA compared with the general fund. So the HRA hasn't really changed, but there are more staff on the general fund side, and so we have to charge more to the general fund, and that's driven by obviously our reduction in agency staff. So we have more employees on the payroll, and that's the way that we count the recharges on a head count on the payroll, and also from the insourcing of leisure. So that drove up the number of staff in the general fund. So it's just that there's more to do on the general fund side. The HRA hasn't changed. It's about proportions.
Any further questions or recommendations? I'm not seeing anything particular on that. So, okay, so we're going to thank you very much. We're going to move on now to page 111, proposed new budget savings 26-27 at 1.1, 1.11, apologies. You can see there's a table, reduced business support service. I think this is the one that is also on page 135 in your pack, where there is further information on the proposals here. So it's a service reduction. So it's 100,000. I'm assuming, is that 100,000 recurring every year? Just because yeah, okay. So it's 0.1 million of proposed new budget savings. Any questions on this? Oh, Councillor Gordon, apologies. This is for you. This is your area, so I'm now going to look over. I'm now going to look to yourself. Okay, I'll just ask a really basic question. So we're talking about business support as being really useful and growing our businesses. Is that part of, when you say reducing business support, will that actually have any impact on businesses? And if it won't, why won't it? Sorry, it's a really basic question, but that's what came to me when I read the paper.
I suppose I would say that, you know, any reduction in number of staff that we've got working with businesses is going to have some impact. But what we're trying to do to alleviate that impact is to sort of redirect the way in which we're working. So we are, you know, it'll go through as a full staff review so that we make sure that we are redirecting where people are working. So we're working very closely with the Wood Green bid, for example, and our trading partnerships, and we're sort of rescoping this overall strategy, whereas we had Opportunity Haringey, which had different sort of sections within it. What we're doing now, and we're sort of taking this, even though it's a cut of the 100,000, we are taking this as an opportunity to redirect, and we need to do that anyway because we've got the London Growth Plan Haringey needs to develop its own London growth plan. And we think that we can use this opportunity to refocus our efforts on particular sectors within our businesses. So the creative sector, for example, that links to the London Borough of Culture and to the Euros, and obviously the London growth plan that is already up and running. And so that we're all in a line with what our fellow boroughs are doing across the whole of the city. So we're taking it as an opportunity. So that's why we think that actually reshaping the service to that extent means that we will have the same sort of impact in terms of how we promote businesses for Haringey to the outside world and how we work with our businesses. We had some very successful, we've organised a business forum, for example. We've had several meetings of the forum. The last one was only last week, that was hosted by the BID and by the bank in Wood Green, the Metro Bank, very well attended. You know, they were discussing things like the local plan, but we're building up that network so that the business network itself have got those ways of interacting with each other, and we can lean on those businesses having that network where they're working together, and we can call on them to support whatever strategy we're putting out, and also, you know, how we're working and how we're promoting the borough to the big world outside. I hope that's clear.
It has. I'm just going to ask a quick question on this. I'm wondering if there's unintended consequences, because, you know, I can see why your unintended consequences of doing this. I spoke to one of our support officers recently, and I hadn't realised that they were a lone person covering a huge area. And when I asked about what was happening with the business support, it wasn't, and we hadn't realised as councillors and other people in the community hadn't understood quite the sort of the lack of information and what was being shared and what was going on. So I'm just wondering if, because I would imagine in some areas they'll be much more connected and far better able to access different support, but there will be other areas that won't have realised what's happening. So you know, it's a great process.
Well, I hope we are communicating just as much. I think the idea is well, I know the idea is that the business forum, which is like a very extensive network of our businesses, we might not have involved everybody in it, but we're constantly, you know, trying to encourage people to join in with that, so that there is a forum. Now, that wasn't provided for before. There is things like, you know, we had a lot of staff engaged in doing things like organising the Christmas trees, for example, and the light switch on. What we've done this year is, because we've, you know, struck that from the budget, but we've actually, you know, got sponsorship from different businesses and things like that. That sort of officer time, you know, has been used in that, you know, at that sort of level of, you know, knocking on doors, how's your business going, something that sort of stuff. Probably won't be as much, but the what we think is actually probably more important, in a sense, is that we are looking at the big strategic sectors within our business community. So that is the creative industries, for example. So we understand what they are, and the Haringey growth plan, we will be getting some support in for that to make sure that we develop that, and that will really hopefully make more concrete a picture of where all of those different sectors lie within our borough and the importance of. We think we've got a good picture already, but we will be able to consolidate that information. So is that in the food and beverage sector? Is it in the creative industries and so on and so forth? So that needs to be, because that will frame how we go for growth in terms of, and our connection with the nighttime economy, for example, which is a big feature of the London Growth Plan. So we're sort of shifting the balance of how we are framing the strategy. I hope that is an explanation, rather than doing some of the work that doesn't actually answer that particular issue.
Oh, thank you. If there was an audit for us to be able to see what was actually happening, then that would be really helpful. I mean, it does nothing big, but just just to check that the information is getting out to everybody, not just in silos. But I'm going to have to move us on. I'm really sorry, because we are now 8:15, and I apologise. We are needing to whip through the rest. So thank you very much, Councillor Gordon, for coming and talking to that, because I know you were here just for that item. So thank you very much. Okay, going to move on. Yep, brilliant. Thank you, Matt. Sorted. Okay, so Appendix 5, Finance and Resource Directorate. So I'm looking at Taryn here, I think. This is here for you. So we've got proposed new budget pressures, which is at the bottom at 1.4. We've got 1.8 million of proposed new budget pressures to be identified across the MTFS. So if you turn over the page to 114, we've got implementation of the corporate landlord model. So yeah. Okay, so Taryn, is there anything you'd like to tell us very briefly about this?
If I just do a very quick summary. So, and this is a pressure that we've been reporting. You would have seen the Q1 report back in September. So the corporate landlord model, it was agreed that we would implement that. That went live 1st of April of this year. That involved bringing together essentially all of the budgets and all of the operations of our operational estate. What that has uncovered is now we've got a much better handle on our running costs in particular, and also our income levels of the estate, and that has identified in year, which we've been reporting, and you'll still see some pressure in when you see the Q2 report as well, and therefore we have reflected that in terms of a pressure going forward into next year. What I would say is a couple of things though to add, and a couple of updates I think probably since we published this report. So we have, with any new model of operation, it does take time to embed. So from the 1st of April, we just literally brought all of the budgets together. We've actually spent the last 6 months really getting kind of under the detail of those. So you would have seen a pressure, quite a significant pressure at Q1 from the corporate landlord model. Actually, that has reduced from Q2. So as we've got into the detail, really understood that a little bit more. And therefore, I do believe, probably similar to some of the pressures that we were talking when we looked at environment and resident experience, I'm hoping that that will come down in terms of the pressure for next year. by the time we get to the final budget. But this is what we thought when we published this report. But I do think it, based on the Q2, it should come down. But we have, for prudence level, built that in as a pressure going forward. We will continue. I think, the idea of a corporate landlord model, you bring together the running of your operational estate, there must be some efficiencies there. So, we're at very early stages. I think as we really start to embed that model, I would expect us to see some improvement in terms of efficiencies, and therefore, I would like to think that that isn't a pressure that we have got year on year, but I do think it will take time for that work to happen, which is why I've suggested it's a pressure for 26, 27. I do think based on the Q2 though, that will hopefully come down by the time we get to the final budget. And I should say, actually, it's probably relevant for all of the pressures. I always describe it as a stake in the ground at certain points in the budget process. We actually do in-year monthly monitoring. And as part of that, kind of the question I'm asking is, we need to look at the latest position in year to decide what we think we might need next year. So next year is about getting the right budget, but not an overinflated budget. Thanks.
Thank you, Taryn. Councillor Small.
Taryn, you said we're expecting it to come down. Could you? I can wait until December and see in Q2, but if you can give any indication as to how much you think we're talking, whether it's 100k or 500k and so on. And I don't think I quite understand why this is a pressure we've identified in year, but we expect it to have disappeared by 2027, 2028.
So in terms of, just to manage your expectations, just in terms of Q2, I won't quote the figure because it hasn't yet gone out to public consumption, but it is it is lower than what we were reporting at Q1, where we've been able to really get under the detail of that. What I would say is, I don't think that the pressure hasn't been created by the implementation of the corporate landlord model. I think, it's essentially been around utility bills, business rates are the key drivers. Those pressures have always been there, but they've kind of been in services and probably been mitigated by other areas of underspend. So I just wanted to just make sure, we haven't implemented a model that then had created more. It's just that we've got much greater visibility around the running costs of our buildings. It has come, well, Q2 forecast, and I would emphasize it's a forecast. You never quite know, do you, what's going to come out of the woodwork until year end, is showing that downward trajectory. I think it will. We will be doing quite extensive work to look at our operational estate over the next 12 months. And therefore, we know that there are various moves planned. We know that we are moving into the new civic in kind of almost less than 18 months now. That in itself will drive some efficiencies and reduce costs. And therefore, at this stage, because, and bringing together of any kind of services should drive out efficiencies and duplication. I'm saying that at this stage, I'm just going to plan for a pressure in 26, 27, but I will continue to take stock during the first part of next year to see where we land. Lots and lots of moving parts of the jigsaw in terms of the operational estate. You asked me a second question. I can't remember the second part.
No, you did answer both. You have answered both. But can I just have a follow-up question? Perhaps it's not an appropriate time to do it, so I'm happy to be overruled or so on by the chair. But considering that the corporate landlord model was introduced as a saving and as supposed to save the council money, with the uncovering, I appreciate now, of an accurate picture as opposed to newly discovered costs as a consequence, are we still expecting the corporate landlord model to deliver a saving in the long term, or is it reliant on what you were just saying around the efficiency savings that we haven't yet modelled and we're not yet sure of, but we hope are going to be there?
So we've still got work to do, I have to say, to kind of fully, like I say, it's taken us the first 6 months to really kind of understand almost everything, both the expenditure budgets coming through, but also the income budget, so the rental income. So we've still got some work to do in that space. I wouldn't like to put a figure on it, and I probably should. I can't actually confirm to you how much was predicated on the corporate landlord model. But, given our financial position, we will be doing everything we can to look for kind of efficiencies across our estate, not just because it's a corporate landlord model, but across our estate. There is one risk actually that I should highlight, which probably isn't factored into this pressure that you see, but just to be open and transparent. We know that there is going to be a business rates reset from the 1st of April. We quite often forget that we also pay business rates on our own properties, and therefore, there is some modelling that we need to do. So there's a risk that we're carrying at the moment. I can't quantify that risk, but there is a risk that our own business rates will increase as well. So there are definitely some moving parts in that figure of 1.7 million that we will certainly try to get under the skin of and just get a firmer indication between now and probably end of December, to be honest, and that's when we start to lock down the numbers. Thanks.
That was excellent question from Councillor Small, and I think recommendation should be in light of the areas that he's highlighted really. I think specifically around greater detail of understanding once you uncover things, and I think this is what's happened, isn't it? You've with corporate landlords come, you've put this in, and actually you're beginning to really understand what the financial pressures actually are within this. But another risk is that you'll find more, and therefore those will come to light. So I think really a bit more of a detailed analysis of this in the next year's pack would be really helpful. I don't know if you wanted anything before that, Councillor Small.
It was actually just in addition, I don't know whether as an action for the OSC, of whether this is an item that we particularly pick out for a future meeting, just because I think we're at some point in next year's work programme, we could be 18 months into the implementation of the corporate landlord model. Plus, we will have seen, or we will know more about the effects of April's business rates change. It might just be an important interval to monitor progress on what we think the landlord model is going to do for the council the next few years, but for OSC to decide.
So do you think, sorry, this is just very quickly, do you think that's better with your housing panel initially and then bring it to OSC if you think because it'll affect across all the areas, or would you prefer it to be initially at OSC?
I think it falls under OSC as a I'm getting some nods over there. Just the thing.
I was going to say, as a different panel member, I think it's a big enough thing and a kind of more overarching thing. And I think because it is a new model, and specifically, I mean, Councillor Smith sort of beat me on some of those questions, but I think the reality is we did introduce it partly as something that was going to be good financially, and I think that deserves quite a lot of scrutiny in terms of whether that is actually happening. And it might be other benefit, in terms of, and that might be fine, but there are kind of financial scrutiny points here that I think would be really worth keeping in the work programme and keeping in the conversation beyond just these individual points.
I'm
bigger
seeing
picture thing.
I'm seeing pretty much unanimous. I think agreement on that, and certainly from the chair of OSC. So absolutely, Councillor Small, that will be going through onto our work programme. But yeah, the greater detail will be hugely appreciated. Okay, so sorry, put my glass back on. Right. Yeah, so we're going through to make sure I'm not missing any. Right, 1.6, the proposed changes to the capital programme, page 115. So I just wanted to ask a very quick question, Taryn. Can you just explain the table to us very briefly, why we've got a budget and finance and resources of nearly 30 million, and then in 29-30 it's down to 0. Thank you.
Thank you. And just the top line of the table that you see totaling 64 million is essentially the current capital programme for finance and resources that we're monitoring in year, so in 25-26. Largely, I suppose when I look at the capital schemes that are within my portfolio, they are largely around digital, and they are also around both our investment in our operational estate and our commercial estate. So, there are some other smaller schemes, but those are the kind of largest numbers that you see. What we are expecting is that, there will be much more investment in the early years in terms of both digital technology and to some extent our operational estate and our commercial portfolio, which over time we would expect to reduce. Now, what I would say is we have done quite a detailed exercise on reviewing all the schemes for 26-27. We probably haven't done as much scrutiny for the future years, and therefore that will kind of come almost as part of next year's process. So, but I am expecting that that's almost the reason for the general trend that you invest heavily in digital, invest heavily in our buildings, you wouldn't expect that level to need to continue year on year. What I would pick up is the figures for 28, 29, 30 and 30, 31 of 0 are probably a little bit unrealistic. So if you take our operational estate, for example, and to some extent digital, there will always be some rolling programs that we will need to have. And that's probably an overlook on my part. So we will pick that up as part of next year's budget process. So the reality of it is that it probably won't be 0 because we'll always need, routine maintenance and investment, which is required every year. Thanks.
Thank you. We've got reduction in digital schemes. Now, I know we've spoken a little bit about digital, but I also know that in the panels, I think digital has been popping up into people's areas when we're looking at the finance. So in this, when you're specifically looking at the reduction of 1.6 million in this, what effects will occur as you reduce the money that you were going to spend? Because obviously that was factored in for part of your digitalisation. That will now no longer be happening. So what impact will that actually have?
Yeah, thank you. So we've done quite a rigorous review of the capital programme actually for digital schemes. So if you were to pick up the Q1 report and look at my capital programme, I think there's kind of probably 6 or 7 different lines all relating to digital. This is where they've just gone in previous years, and then we've added a new scheme in each year. What we have done over the summer is we've looked actually at the totality in terms of the investment that we need. Probably in a couple of buckets, actually. I would say the investment into infrastructure. So kind of, I'll probably do digital colleagues. No, kind of, I won't be saying it right, but in terms of, cables and, what I would call keeping the lights on. Then you've got kind of equipment, and then we've got what we would call service modernisation, which is, the kind of advancement in digital tools, which has probably come up in your panel discussions. So we have looked at that as a totality and really looked at the projects that we are doing and that we are planned. So as part of the service modernisation plan in particular, we've now got a pipeline of projects that are planned over the next kind of 18 months, 2 years. We've got a really good handle, the digital team, very good handle on our digital estate in terms of kind of platforms that need updating, where we are with laptops, etc., and where we are with equipment. So we have done that really fundamental review, and what we've got planned for next year, we have calculated that we can take out 1.1 million without actually having an impact. And this is where we have just put kind of each year we put a different scheme in, but never looked at it as a totality. So, I've been asked that question a couple of times on this. What's the impact? It will not have an impact on the service modernisation programme, which is essentially, I think, it probably came up in adults, and the digital investment would have come up in housing and kind of would have come up in terms of customer services. This is more efficiencies, I would say. The last thing I would say, and this is a really good example, but it's applied across the programme actually. We are trying for areas like digital, like the operational estate, let me use my two as an example, is as we go into the budget for next year in the capital programme, have a really good idea about what the schedule of works are. So we quite often have, kind of a holding round figure in terms of some of what I would call rolling programmes, routine maintenance, kind of that investment we need to do every year. We are trying, and we're doing that work in the background now, to make sure that any capital line that goes in the programme next year, we've actually got the evidence behind what we're going to be spending or what we plan to spend. And that's really important to get the profiling right, because what I don't want to be doing is kind of almost being too optimistic with the profile of spending and therefore budgeting for borrowing costs that we don't need. So hopefully that's a bit of answering that question, but also hopefully giving committee a bit of insight in terms of the work we're doing more widely on the capital programme.
Again, I wonder if this is an area that it's huge. I'm imagining the spend is enormous in this, and there's a lot of service delivery that is dependent on digital working for us now in a way that I don't think, as a council, I don't remember the emphasis on this before. Again, I wonder if this is something we ought to be looking at this across OSC, because I know I've seen, you know, things that are coming out from recommendations in your panels, and you know, areas of questioning that's coming up. So at some point, I think we ought to put a sort of a stick in the sand and just to see where we're at with this, what our spend is and what we're actually thinking we can deliver, and the savings on that and the impact for residents. So it's just a thought, but it's a recommendation, and if we put it on the work programme, it can be discussed at future to see if that's something that would be useful. Okay, thank you. Any other points? No. Okay, right. Moving on to page 116, Appendix 6, Corporate Budget. We've got £5.1 million of new proposed reductions. I've got at 1.3, got £78 million proposed new budget pressures have been identified over the 5 years, and 1.8 in 26 and 27, summarised in the table below. I wanted to ask in this table, so Barry, you have waited very patiently, I think, for this question. I'd like to understand about the North London Waste Authority line in this. I read in the papers earlier about a pressure on the council's budget. I didn't see a figure there, but I've seen it here. Is this the totality of the pressure, or is this just in relationship to something else, and that's other levies and the 2.5% inflation?
Just to me, sorry, Councillor Connor, which table is it? What page is it on?
It's page 117, and it's titled description. Title before that is proposed new budget pressures at 1.3, but I think page 117 would be the most helpful. And in the table, it's the fourth line down.
Fourth line down, so the one that says revised NLWA and other levies.
Yeah.
I believe, and Tara, you can correct me, but I believe that's our levy contribution, is it? Yeah.
Yeah, so this particular line, so there's two, I suppose, levy subscriptions that are quite significant for us. One is the North London Waste Authority and the other is the concessionary fares, which you see in that table. What you are seeing in terms of this table is essentially our levy contribution that we will give. So it's based on the latest forecast that has been produced by NLWA. What it doesn't take account of is any increase in the levy associated with the new energy plants. So this is almost the business as usual assumption on the levy that we are expecting, taking into account all sorts of assumptions there, but doesn't include any assumption around the energy facility. And it is highlighted, you're right, Councillor Connor, it's highlighted as a risk. The reason it is not shown here, so we're working actually between both Barry and myself and others, we are working quite closely with NLWA in terms of that particular project, understanding where they are, understanding timescales, the financial implications and the risks. The likely impact, financial impact, is outside of this MTFS period. So it's likely to be beyond 2031. So you could say, well, why have we highlighted it here? It's too early to highlight anything in the figures because we just don't know. We're working through that at the moment. But I think it's really important that we highlight it as a risk, even though it is beyond the MTFS period. So that's why you're seeing it in the body of the report. But this here is the business as usual levy forecast that is made by, we get a report a couple of times a year from NLWA, and I think this was based on the October forecast. Thanks.
Yeah, only just to add that that levy is effectively our portion. That's our share of it. So our share is then based on effectively the London Heat project is related to, but not this. So that is effectively the to bring range of different facility. This relates to the development of that site, being that it's a stage project. So it's not necessarily saying that there will definitely be saying is if the delays continue, period that's a extended period, flagging as target, that is the longer bigger those costs.
Thank you. I just noticed in the report it said about a significant risk. And so when that word comes up, my antennae is raised and I'm like, what significant risk? Okay. So this is like a watch and wait. So we've got it on our radar now that this is a line for future years. We'll be just seeing how that progresses.
That's what I was saying, that North London Waste Authority are managing their contractor. Imagine that all the digital authority, so taking a very active, I can be delivered.
Sure. Okay. So Councillor Small.
Yeah, it's on this table generally. Is that okay? I think just so I can understand, so 78 million of the proposed new budget pressures, but 60 million of that is because of the move towards increasing the general contingency. Yeah, so that's the big shift. But because we're going to use 10 million this year and then 5 million next year and so on. I think if I'll just put that little asterisk if we come back to that if when I answer the question. But my main thing was I don't quite understand in 2030 why we suddenly get these huge shifts. Like for example on concessionary fares, why it's only 8 million from. I may have just misunderstood what was just said on the NLWA, but I'm getting some nods. I think I did. And the same on the revised pay inflation. Is that all? That's all connected to the same thing, maybe? Or why we suddenly go from 560k to 4.4 million, and why from 550 to 1.5 million? Maybe I misunderstood. Sorry.
No, I will give it a go and then I'll pass over to Josephine if she wants to add anything on because I asked exactly the same question. So essentially, our MTFS period is over 5 years. So when you would have, so this time last year we would only have been going up to 29.30. So what this is doing is just extending it for the year. So we wouldn't have accounted for the NLWA cost. We wouldn't have accounted for the concessionary fares. So this is not a 7 million increase or an 8 million increase. It's essentially just almost fast forwarding the budget one more year so that you always see a 5-year MTFS. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So between 2026 and 2030, we already had kind of adjustments in the MTFS. As you can see, these figures here are adjustment to what's already built in, and then 31, it's new year. You haven't seen it before, so you're going to see in the total figure. Thanks.
So can I just note to just the people in the room, because only they can hear me, that then actually what's shown in this is kind of generally quite positive, because if you discount the money that we're putting aside in the contingency, it's actually a positive movement from previous in every year. Only slight positive movement, but it is a slight positive movement. Yeah, but I mean, look, we're putting 15 million in 27-28, but the actual total impact of this whole table on the budget in 27-28 is 3,000 less than 15 million. So yeah, so it's not.
The only thing I would say is, so you hear me say this all the time, a budget is based on a series of assumptions. I've got a lot more assurance, shall I say, on the assumptions for 26-27. So I guess I'm caveating, that's what we think at the moment based on our latest forecast. The further you get into the future, it gets really difficult to predict. And you can see our numbers have changed quite significantly for 26-27. So Councillor White, yes, at face value on 27th of November, it does look like a much improved position. But I suppose I don't want to be sitting here in 3 years' time and you say, oh, 3 years ago you said it was a much improved position. There are so many moving parts. You know, the assumptions around inflation alone and the pay award can actually shift us from kind of a more positive position to the opposite. So I'll just, Councillor White, I hope you don't mind me just caveating that on record, just in case it doesn't show an improving position in 3 years' time.
Just ask that this may come into the budget section. The thinking behind the 15 million contingency is effectively EFS contingency in the budget point we're at, in the sense that it's necessary to do, but it puts a budget pressure in which will mean we need the extra EFS. But presumably you're still concluding that it is absolutely necessary to do, even though it creates the additional budget pressure in the totality, which puts us into EFS.
Yeah, although I would say it's not the contingency alone that's put us into EFS. So, and I should say these are the increases. So when you see the final budget report, you'll see the total corporate contingency, and the actual allocation in 26, 27 and those future years is actually 25 million. Partly because we're carrying significant amounts of risk. So I will need to make a judgment call in my section 25 statement in the final budget report. I will need to make a judgment call about how much level of contingency to carry. I am particularly nervous because we tend to lock down numbers quite early. It's kind of end of December time. We've still got a final quarter. We've been caught out last year. We fully exhausted contingency. We have adopted a slightly different approach to contingency this year, in that I think we've got 12 million in the budget, or 10 million, so many different figures for next year and this year, but it's either 10 or 12. But rather than it just being a balancing figure at the end of the year to deal with any overspend, we're having a much tighter grip, so people have to bid in for you, because contingency should be for unforeseen events or very minor slippage in savings. So I wanted to move away from that and actually have people consciously coming to me to say, I've got an unexpected spend that wasn't predicted when we set the budget, and we bid that way. So we are adopting that approach. Does it increase our EFS ask? It does, because essentially, but what I'll be saying in my section 25 statement is, because we don't have high levels of reserves here, actually contingency is almost the only thing that I have at my disposal for those unexpected events in the year. So it might feel high. It's certainly higher. I usually go for about 5% of net budget is normally. I just feel, applying for EFS isn't an easy and a quick task, and actually things happen in the year where I need to be able to manage those risks as and how they come up. So that's what we're assuming at the moment. We could reduce that and therefore reduce the budget gap and reduce the EFS ask, but I just think for the risk that we're carrying in year, we need to maintain a higher level of corporate contingency that we've got at the moment. But it might change, and I'll make that judgment call when we finally see the final budget end of December. Thanks.
Okay, so thank you. I think we've asked the majority of the questions from the table, and I think we've highlighted the North London Waste Authority as the ongoing potential risk. You noted the papers may be possibly significant risks going forward, but particularly after 2030. So that's what I've understood. And in the proposed changes to capital programme, we've listened to the arguments around the contingency reserves and understood the rationale for that process. Is there anything the committee wants to add at this point on that? Nope. Okay, thank you very much. Well, in which case, sure, officers, we've done one section. You'll be pleased to hear. So now we're all going to go back to the cabinet papers, which will be back at the beginning, and that is on. Let's get my page 59. Thank you. Right, agenda item 8. So this is the MTFS. We will have all seen this as part of scrutiny in our own panels. So hopefully people will be coming with a little bit of an understanding of where we are under the financial pressure. Taryn, if you just like to give us like in a couple of sentences, what's going on with the pressure and the finances. I mean, I literally mean a sentence or two, nothing too extensive. And then we'll go straight to probably a little bit more searching questions, pushing questions, rather than hopefully necessary just on the figures, but it might still be on the figures. So yeah. So over to you, Taryn, just to give us a couple of sentences on the current state of play.
Yes, thank you. So the report that you see is, so over the summer, so let me backtrack. Over the summer, we have been doing, it's probably our busiest time for what I would call budget planning. We have been reviewing all of the, so we published the MTFS in July, the latest position, but over the summer, we have been reviewing all of the pressures that we are anticipating going into 26-27. We have been looking at savings opportunities, and then we've also been reviewing what I would call some of our corporate assumptions, and that's some of the detail that we provided that we've just talked through there. Bringing the main focus of this report, I should say, is about Cabinet agreeing for the new proposals to go out for consultation, which was agreed back on the 11th of November. This is part of the consultation process, scrutiny, as well as external consultation with residents. But essentially what the key figures that I would encourage you just to kind of, I suppose, take away from this is that we have identified pressures of just over 30 million. So new pressures, I should say. These are new pressures over and above what we'd assumed when we presented the latest budget gap back in July. So that's not 30 million in total. That's as a result of the work that we've done over the summer. We've identified a further 30 million that we need. You'll recall that compared to the current year when we built in 70 million for service pressures. So, you know, when you look at the tables in the report, the total amount that we're proposing is not vastly different to what we have built in this year. We have identified, I'm going to say, new savings of 7 million, but 2.3 million of those of what I would call savings, which we have talked through today. And then there are 4.6 million of management actions, which I define as kind of internal efficiency. So no direct impact on frontline services or policy changes. Now, you might feel that that is a fairly low number given our financial position, and I'll summarise that in a moment. But actually, you can see from the report that we have got quite significant numbers of previously approved savings to deliver in 26-27. So in total, we have got 21.9 million. So there's only 7 million of new proposals, but next year alone, we have got 21.9 million to deliver in total. That is on top of the 30 million that we are expected to deliver in the current year. So it's no small order, and we talk about savings delivery quite a lot here at our Avian Scrutiny Committee. We talk about it a lot at Audit Committee. We talk about it in quite a few places. We feel that our focus has to be on the delivery of those existing savings. Before we start to layer more and more new savings on top, we need to assure ourselves that those are delivered. So there's a couple of other assumptions that I'll just highlight, and then I'll bring together the overall picture. So back in July, we assumed that the council tax increase would be 1.99%. The report that went to Cabinet, it's an officer assumption. It's in line with the assumption that's made by government, is that council tax will increase by 4.99%. However, absolutely appreciate that that is a full council decision. It assumes the council tax base will increase by 1%, and it makes an average assumption around fees and charges as well. So bringing all of that together, you will see in the report that even if on the assumption that all of the new savings proposals do go forward, and they do go forward to full council, that's a big if, because we're currently going through the consultation process, there is still a budget gap or an income shortfall of 57 million forecast for 26-27. I would say that that assumption is before the impact of fairer funding reforms, which we know will come into play from the 1st of April. When we wrote this report, we still only had the consultation document, and I think I've said quite openly, Harry and Gay was set to lose fairly significant sums, particularly in terms of government grant. We have now had the policy paper, just to give members the update. So the policy paper was published last Thursday. What that is, it doesn't give you detailed allocations, but what it does do is it it gives you the outcome of the consultation on the fairer funding, and it also sets out a fairly good indication. You know, it's often said a good accountant can work out what your approximate allocations could be, but it gives you a very good indication about where the provisional local government finance settlement will be. So that came out on Thursday. There are a number of things. This is in the policy paper. It's all in the public domain. There are a number of things that have changed as a result of the consultation. One is that they have taken into housing costs into consideration when measuring deprivation. That in particular is a really important factor for London. And they are also using the latest indices of deprivation figures, which have just been released probably about 4 weeks ago. That's really important. Confirmation that they will use the latest population data and also the latest spend data, which is really important. You know, we've seen an upward trajectory in both our adult social care and temporary accommodation spend. There is also an indication in that policy paper that those councils in receipt of the recovery grant, of which Haringey was one of them in 25-26, will retain an element of that recovery grant. And then the final change that they made is that for those particularly authorities that receive the recovery grant, instead of having they describe it as a floor, so that's the maximum you can lose, I suppose. In the consultation, we were anticipating a 0% cash floor. In those there are certain authorities, we won't know whether this is a direct impact on Haringey until we get the final provisional allocations in December, but we think that those that benefited from the recovery grant in the current year will have a floor that is in real terms, and that is quite significant because it actually means an increase in inflation. So, you know, we don't know what the impact will be. I'm not going to quote any impact because I will wait to see what the provisional allocations come out with the week of the 15th of December. However, those 4 factors cannot worsen Haringey's position compared to the consultation document. What I would say, and I've said this quite openly, you know, the challenge that you see in this paper was before any impact of funding reform. So everything that I talk about, all the challenges, all the controls that we're putting in place, all the actions that we're doing, still is absolutely required because of that 57 million gap. Best possible scenario, we don't lose anything, but I can't sit here and say that at this stage. But those 4 factors would give an indication that it's not quite as bad as what the consultation document would be for Haringey. So I know that was a bit more of a sentence, Councillor Connor, but actually it's quite an important. But I just really want to emphasise it really doesn't change the fundamentals of what is in this paper. We still have a really steep financial challenge ahead of us. Thanks.
No, that's really helpful, actually. Thank you. Is working? No. Yes, thank you. You can hear that click. Brilliant. Okay, so I know colleagues will have a number of questions on this. So what I'm going to do is ask you if initially you could keep your questions to 2, so it allows everyone to get a chance to at least ask 2, and then we'll see what time we've got available at the end. So I've seen Councillor Guinness's hand go up first. So if you'd like to open, Councillor Guinness.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose my question is, in light of the autumn statement yesterday, could there be anything within that budget that might impact on us or help us to reduce that outcome? I think the area about additional council tax and so on. So was there anything within the budget that could help us potentially?
Basically, in terms of the additional council tax, that is money going to the government, it's not coming to us. There was in the actual paperwork that it was going to go to local services. but probably what might happen is no indication there'll be any extra money for us. We're in a 3-year, we're having a 3-year funding settlement. And probably what it'll mean is that the government will use that money to backfill any savings that they then make in the budget. There's no indication it will increase. They may, but at this point in time, there's no indication that that will increase the budget of any local authorities. That it's a way of raising central government funding. Where we could see a difference is where the business rates review is going to happen, and that is going to could make a difference in Haringey. I'll hand over to Charan for more detail on that.
So the budget yesterday, and it probably as expected, it was largely about almost impact on local residents rather than any specific reference to local government. But there were a couple of announcements, and Councillor Carlin has already said about the council tax. Yeah, you know, we got the policy paper last week, and that was really the direction of travel for local government. That gives us an indication of what our 3-year settlement would be. But there were a couple of announcements. So in terms of SEND reforms, and actually there's one thing about kind of what the Chancellor said, but the detail is in the documents that sits behind. So in terms of the SND reforms, there is still an ambitious plan to look at those. We may hear something early in the new year, but what was confirmed that could have impacted us is the statutory override on the DSG deficit. So the dedicated schools grant deficit will be extended to 2028. For me, it is still unclear what the impact will be after 2028, but there is an indication that, you know, local authorities won't be expected to kind of, which was going to be a big risk for us, that local authorities won't be expected to deal with the consequences if the override goes. We touched on the council tax, and I think just to echo what Councillor Carlin said, we will collect the tax, but it looks like it will go straight to Treasury. The big one is the business rates valuation. There was a couple of announcements in there. So we've known it was coming, actually, the business rates revaluation. So this is a revaluation of every business, every kind of hereditament in the borough of which we are. You know, we have our own buildings. That will come into effect from the 1st of April. They announced the multipliers, which determines how much each business will pay in business rates. So how much you pay in business rates is determined by the value of your property that is set by the valuation office, and the multiplier, the pence in a pound, that's set by government. So they did confirm the multipliers with definitely some additional support, I would say, for retail, hospitality and leisure businesses. So there was a lot of talk about support there. So in terms of the impact on us, we will be impacted because we pay business rates on our own buildings, but it will also have an impact on our local businesses out in the community as well. What they did talk about, though, was transition arrangements. So, and look, I've been around and I've been doing budgets for a couple of resets now with business rates. You know, it's not about a cliff edge. They announced some transitional arrangements. So if you see a sudden increase in your business rates, it will be very much staggered over a kind of a 3 to 4 year period. And similarly, if you're going to see a reduction, you won't see that reduction immediately. So that was also announced in the budget yesterday. And I think those are the main points that really impact on us. Let me just double check. Sorry, just whilst we're... I mean, what I would say is quite a lot of the announcements with any budget are at quite a high level. What they truly mean for each individual local authority won't necessarily transpire for some time. So they talked about libraries in schools. So they want every primary and secondary school to have a library going forward. They announced money for playgrounds, so additional money. We don't know what that looks like. We don't know if it will benefit Haringey, but that was certainly an announcement. And is there anything else, just so I don't forget? I think those were the main things. There were lots and lots of announcements, I should say, Councillor Gunners, but those are the ones that I think really we have got our eye on. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you, councillor Guinness. Second question.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My second question is, obviously, I kind of recognize that the report is highlighting that relying on exceptional financial support is not a sustainable long-term plan. It's like it's basic because it's gonna every million we draw down will cost us and so on. So in 1.20, it's basically saying that the officers have been out commencing on a work to identify more transformational changes that will be needed for 2027 and 28 to further reduce spending. This will focus on transformational changes to statutory services, to focus on prevention. So I was kind of like, when I read that, I was, what does it mean? Are we kind of effectively saying that, well, that there is no way out? We will have to, you know, make significant cuts or changes to our frontline services. So I just wanted to understand that, what that work would, does it almost preparing the ground for basically much more severe kind of cuts or other type of service reductions? Thank you.
I think that there are a couple of things kind of going on as well, which in the medium to longer term is going to improve our financial position. So we've got to kind of hold tight. The proposed changes to adult social care. So the work that's being done at the moment, which is going to report in, Adam, do you remember exactly when it's going to be, which is going to report in with it, I think 2 years time. When they said, yeah, I think it's going to be a couple of years time. So where we're seeing huge pressures, I think what we're going to see is changes that are going to happen in the way the service delivery of the pressures is going to change, and the government is very, very aware of it. I attended a meeting on behalf of the leader, and the Minister of State actually, she said, Alison McGovern said, we are very aware of the pressures local authorities are under: adults, children's, temporary accommodation, SEND transport. Those pressures are across the country. It is not just Haringey. We have specific demographic pressures in Haringey that makes those things difficult for us. The number of over 65s increases in that, levels of deprivation on the deprivation indexes of over 65s in Haringey. We score very, very highly on that borough-wide in terms of where we're sitting nationally, etc., driving pressures onto our council. But those things are going to change. The other things that we have to do as a council, because strategically we have to do it to get ourselves out of the hole, and some of these things have been proposed for a while, but we have to look at things like invest to save. It's difficult to do those things when you're in the financial position that we're in, but if we look long term, there are things that we just have to do, because long term we have to be in a position where we're more in control than we are of things like adult care, children's placements, you know, things like that, those kinds of things. What the council has to do is we have to look at how we deal with our budget. These are big numbers. They're not going to be filled by what I call T money. But what we really have to do is strategically take a long view, so that while we may need EFS, and that's what councils are doing where commissioners come in, for example. When commissioners go into councils, and this is not suggesting commissioners are coming into Haringey, let's just be very, very clear on that. But when you look at what other councils do where the commissioners have come in, they don't start slashing and closing everything. In actual fact, what they do is look at what in the medium to long term you're going to do to reach a financially sustainable position. And that's the work that we're already doing in the council. So those are the kinds of things. And so that's so what I'm saying is both in terms of as Alison McGovern said yesterday, in terms of yesterday, the day before, in terms of the things that the government's working on to drive down costs for local government, how they can try to change what's happening for local government, plus the long-term things that we can do. That is how we will get out of the financial difficulties that we're in, and how we won't just continue to go, oh, well, this is just never ending. So if we see this as the position that we're in for the short term, there's nothing much that we can do about it, because we've seen these huge increases in adult social care, et cetera, et cetera. As I've said, this is not unique in any way to Haringey at all. The reports that I've seen are that 50% of local authorities are expected to need to be in receipt of EFS within the next 2 years. So, you know, this is across the board. The government's aware that it's across the board. What are the things they're going to do? If we have to borrow money, can they give us better rates to borrow money at? The Tories actually penalised you and gave you even higher rates. This government took away the higher rates and said they're not penalising you, but we're still paying more than the government is paying to borrow. So how can they do those kinds of things, like housing but borrows at a lower rate? Why can't we borrow for EFS at the same lower rate? It doesn't cost the government more. They're just making less money out of us. But in the end, we need that. So those are the kind of conversations as well that we have.
Okay, thank you for your questions. Who would like to go next with Councillor Small?
Thank you, Chair. My first question is on the independent sounding board, which is suggested as part of the financial recovery on page 61. Personally, I'm not averse to the idea of bringing in expertise and trying to bring that in. I think, though, I would personally like a bit more information about who we're considering, where they're from, etc., in borough, out of borough, that kind of stuff. But also the sector experts to oversee and hold the council to account for the delivery. I don't want to do ourselves out of a job by somebody else holding you to account. But I would just like to understand how you foresee that working with the sort of democratic oversight that needs to happen. That's the first question. My second one, kind of pick with what I have. I'm going to go with the interest rates on the projected cost of EFS, of the cost of maintaining EFS. It's very useful as a statistic. What I don't quite understand is where that sits alongside our cost of other borrowing, the cost we're spending to maintain our existing borrowing, and what EFS would add to that pressure. I'm just trying to understand the picture of where the council is in terms of the SIPFA, is that what it's called? The guidelines as to where maintaining interest. Thank you.
So in terms of, if I just touch on the independent board, and I should say it's very early thinking stages at the moment. What we are trying to do, so every authority that is in receipt of EFS will be subject to a review by government. What we are trying to do is we're trying to be really proactive, so that actually when we have those conversations with government, and myself and the chief exec quite often do, we always ask them, what more can we do? You know, is there anything else that we should be doing? They will look at us to see whether we have externally challenged ourselves. And so what an independent board will do is, so this is not about somebody coming in and coming, like we had a couple of organisations coming in last year and helping us to identify savings. This is almost a couple of sector experts that may come in and just challenge us on, maybe our savings delivery, our service performance, etc. It doesn't impact on the democratic process at all. That is something quite separate. It's about just, sometimes you're too close to things, aren't you? And you don't always see some things that are maybe staring at you in front of opportunities. Actually, and it's not uncommon, just bringing a bit of independence and, whether it's a board or it's a couple of individuals to really challenge us, mainly as officers, to say, have we scrutinised every pound that we spend? Have we, going back to the earlier question, 80% of our spend goes on statutory services or there or thereabouts. Have we really challenged ourselves about, could we deliver these services any differently that would be more effective? So it's really about that. It's not in place at the moment. It's just, we're just trying to get ahead of almost the things that government will be expecting us to do to reduce our reliance on EFS. As in the same way, the spending controls that we've got in place that I've kind of talked about, those are all the things that they would expect us to, to put in place, as well as what Councillor Carlin has talked about, the bigger, longer term transformational ideas to try to minimise exceptional financial support. There is no other option. We are assuming we will get a 3-year settlement. Let's assume there will be no more money, and therefore exceptional financial support is almost the only option on the table. So, that independence will really challenge us as an organisation about have we really, really looked at every opportunity that we could. So we'll keep you updated, and you will see some of the update, not as part of Q2 because that is about to be published. And as I say, that we haven't got the board in place at the moment. It's just something we're thinking about kind of in the new year. But we report on our financial recovery plan as part of the quarterly monitoring report, which you'll see here at OSC and also the panel. So you will absolutely be cited on the work, if that is put in place. So that was the first one. So in terms of the cost of borrowing, and actually it's on page, so the two charts, the two EFS charts on page, I've got a paper version. What is it, page 81? So the two EFS charts, we do that many charts to demonstrate EFS, don't we? And the question you've just asked, I was thinking, we didn't include that chart, which essentially shows our total, almost our total debt, and then what element of it is EFS. So we've got that, and maybe I'll send it to Dominic and we can kind of circulate it around because it's quite interesting. Look, our debt levels are high. So if you compare ourselves on the SIPA benchmark, Treasury advisors use benchmarking, we are high compared to others. So we can do that, this is not just EFS, this is, our ambitions in our capital programme. So we are trying to limit the element of new borrowing. Actually, what these charts show you on page 81 is if we do nothing, so if we do nothing, what Councillor Carlin has described and what I've just described, that gives you a picture of how much of our net budget will be funded by exceptional financial support by the time we get 5 years down the line. But more importantly, the borrowing costs, and it is a do nothing scenario, and we're not going to do nothing. But I think what I'm trying to demonstrate here is, even if our debt levels weren't high and we didn't benchmark not so well on compared to others, actually this position isn't sustainable even just with EFS alone. So, do nothing 2030, that 14 million that we're spending on borrowing costs could be spent on service delivery. So that is why it's really important that we do all the work that Councillor Carlin has just described, and, we really challenge ourselves. Does that answer the bad?
Yeah, it definitely does. If we could just get the actual specifics on the chart, that would be good. Thank you.
And at this point, I'd like to do a recommendation on your first one that you said. I had that as a key one. So I'd like colleagues' advice really on how we've sort of put this recommendation, because the Independent Sounding Board, but also there's a mention of the new financial sustainability plan. And I think these are new. This is a new world into which we are now going into. And I know at 1.17, which I think we've already brought up, that by 26, 27, we've got potentially EFS of potentially over 90 million in total. So I think, putting all those very significant factors in play, when I looked at exactly that question, my concern was suddenly, it's a huge amount that we are borrowing. At what point are we going to get pushback? And you're saying about you need external oversight. At what point are we going to get pushback as a council by, whomever saying, actually, you do need to cut things in order to, because I know as a Section 151 officer, you would normally hit a balanced budget. All the years we've been doing this, it's been a balanced budget, and then suddenly we're in this very different world. And I know that with the EFS, that has changed the thing. But at some point, somebody is going to say, right, okay, you've already got 90 million. Okay, what are the other asks? And for us as councillors, when we're looking at, you're talking about the statutory stuff that can we do better, but we're also looking at the non-statutory stuff like our libraries, which we all hold dear and that we've just put huge amounts of money into. And there is that slight nervousness of going, okay, are you going to be challenged at that point in when you're doing this? So I think for me, the recommendation is we don't know yet what this is going to be about, but actually I think we need, as this progresses, I think this needs to be front and centre back to OSC to really understand what this is all about, and actually is there a push from whomever to sort of ask us to sort of draw in our spending, because actually that for us as councillors is kind of fundamental.
Let's just be clear. When I was talking about what we need to do in terms of transformation, I'm not talking about us not saving money. This has to save. What I'm trying to say is that it's the big things that will save us money. Because when you've got a budget gap as big as the budget gap is, although we should see help from government in terms of how we deliver social care, etc., the things that they're working on because they're aware, we have to change the way we are delivering our services to bring those costs down. So when I talk about what we have to be doing, I'm completely agreeing that we are going to have to reduce the amount of money we spend. We have to, but it's not going to happen by what I call T money, because that's just, that's not going to, we save a few 100,000 but we've got £50 million gap. So what we have to do is, the only way we do it as a council is to have that really big transformational look across the council and across the statutory service and everything else, but how we are delivering services, how we are staffing ourselves, how all of those kinds of things, how we are milking our assets, like our corporate corporate property, parks, whatever, how we're working with residents to help us, all of those kinds of things, but big transformational thinking is how we're going to get out of the hole. Tara.
Just so is it, as a local authority, you have various statutory responsibilities, don't you? So I've got a statutory responsibility to set a balanced budget. We have statutory responsibilities in adult social care. We have statutory responsibilities in children's. And actually, I think local authorities are in that position now where you almost can't meet all your statutory, but EFS gives that opportunity to still meet your statutory responsibilities and me to still meet mine. There's just, I mean, that key point of, so much of our spend is on statutory responsibilities, which we will still have to do. Now, the commitment that we need to give to ourselves is that we are being really creative and really thinking about all the opportunities about how we could deliver them differently. You know, there's lots of examples out there now that we can get exactly the same outcomes or sometimes even better outcomes for our residents by delivering them differently. So when we have statutory responsibilities, it's not really specific how you need to meet them. So we do need to challenge ourselves to that. But until those statutory responsibilities go, even if all we did was our statutory responsibilities, we still wouldn't be able to set a balanced budget based on what we're seeing here at the moment. So it is a different conversation that we will be, and look, government are fully aware, you know, they get this. I think Councillor Carlin heard it yesterday, you know, we're having those conversations all the time. There is just a fundamental issue that there is not enough funding in the system to meet our statutory requirements going forward. The other thing I would just wanted to say is, you know, I almost don't like to see things as or things described as cuts. Actually, it's almost, you know, we have a set of priorities, we have a financial envelope, you're almost prioritizing things that are most important to you. And I think, you know, that is something that we will need to consider as we go through the next couple of years. And then the final thing, only because you made reference to it, Councillor Connor, so in the report, it's described as a sustainability plan, but I probably just described it as a recovery plan. When we prepared the finance response and recovery plan, actually, our aim was to not need EFS in 25, 26 and 26, 27. Now you can see from the report here tonight that because of increasing numbers and other pressures and everything, actually it's probably, dare I say, unlikely. You know, they're almost not needing it in 25, 26 is just not going to be possible. Not needing it in 26, 27 isn't going to be possible. So actually it's almost the sustainability plan is a review of those plans to say, actually our priority now is to minimise the amount that we use, because actually the aspiration of not requiring it at all is actually just not achievable. So it's about being that sense of realism and also looking across the next 5 years, which picks up on Councillor Carlin's point.
Brilliant. Thank you. Councillor White.
Thanks. Sorry, I just wanted to kind of draw this all together because it's supposed to be a recommendation coming from Councillor Small's question. And really, you know, the situation is that we've got a structural problem that's facing local government. The money we've got coming in under the funding structure isn't gonna meet our statutory responsibilities. And so until the government sorts that structural problem out, which we're hoping will happen in the medium term, hopefully, we've got certain things in place. And I think we just want to make sure that we, as Scrutiny here, are seeing what we need to see. So when we're talking about the independent sounding board, we need to be really clear as that develops what that is, who's on it, who's deciding who's on it, when they're meeting. Are they meeting in private, in public? You know, are they producing minutes? If they are producing minutes, are we going to see them? And we just need to know all of that, and we need to come to some arrangement about how we're going to be involved in that progress, in that process, and everything else that's going on. So I don't know if that's a clear enough recommendation, but
I think I gave a sort of a more a part of it, and you've gone to very much the structural, which is brilliant because that's the bit I hadn't done. So I'd done one part. Don't ask me to repeat what I said because that's now 10 minutes ago, but we'll put both together and we'll share it with the committee so that you can all see what that, but it's such an important point, Councillor Small, and yes, I think, yeah, it's vital for us to really have that oversight or, you know, understanding of what's actually happening, because it is a very different and changing world. So thank you, Councillor Small, for your questions. I've got Councillor Lawton. Did you want to ask anything at this point, or go to Councillor White? Well, no, it's
yeah, no, I do. I'd actually like to ask something that relates though also to what's being said, because I think there's a financial scrutiny point here in kind of scrutinising something for the sake of scrutinising. And I'm worried a little bit that we're doing that in the sense of all these kind of, like you said, making sure that we're definitely looking like we're always looking. And I worry, to be honest, that some of that is also time intensive, money intensive. This independent board presumably costs money. These people, you know, all of these things. Sorry. Yeah, all of these things cost money in and of themselves and take time away from realistically a very stretched service. And actually, I almost want to turn this on its head and say that I would like to be clear from a scrutiny perspective. I would like to scrutinise the scrutiny, if that makes sense. I'd like to be clear that the scrutiny that we're doing as a council is worthy and isn't just us begging the people above us to trust that we really do care and are trying to save all the money that we need to save. We are in a financially unsustainable position. Everyone's agreeing on that over and over again in all of these meetings. I think we've all been present in lots of other meetings that we're agreeing on that. And whilst I understand that within that, we have to, of course, do our due diligence to both set balanced budget, although I agree with Councillor Connor that now almost sits in another world. Now we're talking about claiming money beyond the budget that we have available. But also, obviously, deliver on services, both statutory and unstatutory, although I loathe those terms. I am slightly concerned that some of this ends up costing more money and more time than actually is reasonable, to be honest, given that we basically can't afford the services that we're producing. We're all agreeing on that. So I suppose what I would like to know is, within it, I suppose, if we're going to produce that recommendation, is can we prove that that is worthwhile, that level of scrutiny, actually, if I'm allowed to be so
Do you know,
bold.
that's I think also challenging the outcomes, which is exactly what you're doing. You're looking at it saying, is it delivering what we want it to do? Is it doing what it says on the tin? I think that's a fundamental question. And I think that's yeah, hugely relevant. So Taryn, I don't know if you want to just quickly comment on that, but I would agree.
Yeah, look, we would rather bring in some independent scrutiny that we choose that is helpful and is adding value to what we were doing than having some independence imposed on us, I suppose, in a nutshell. And therefore, you know, given that some of the conversations that we do have, you know, we know that when government do come in, they will ask us about, you know, what is the independence, you know, kind of review of yourself that you've done. So we did carry out a SIP for external review. It's actually a year ago now. It feels like a lifetime ago, actually. You know, so, but it's really important that, you know, we are in control of that, you know, whatever that looks like. And a board is probably the wrong way to describe it. It's about the independent challenge. It's really important that we bring in the right challenge that is adding value. But I think it's a really good, it's a really good challenge, and it's certainly one that I would take back. You know, what I should say is, you know, our auditors will be watching us closely as well for value for money. So, you know, we've got, you know, there'll be lots of eyes on us, you know, so, you know, we've really got to make sure that that is worthwhile, which is why we haven't rushed into it as well. So, you know, again, the report is quite open and honest about the things that we are thinking about putting in place, but some of those things aren't. But I think it's a really good challenge that I'll take away.
We'll add that in. So Councillor Lawton, was there another question at this moment, or did you can save, you don't have to answer both. Oh, right, okay, no, it's just if I don't want to force you into thinking, no, you're okay. Councillor White.
I've got a couple of hopefully quite brief questions. First one is about council tax collection. The report says council tax collection, not just in Haringey, but in neighbouring boroughs, is going down. So what are the reasons for that, and what are we doing to collect more of the council tax? Obviously, we need to be trying hard to collect more of it. That was one question. And then the other one was in the risks bit of the report. It mentions that KPMG did a value for money risk assessment highlighting that the council has weaknesses in its processes in place to identify or monitor savings, which I think is quite relevant to what we spend a lot of our time looking at budget time. What are those weaknesses? And what are we, you know, what are we doing about them? And yeah, because I think we've seen a lot of the time savings not being delivered, and you know, Yeah.
Okay, so in terms of council tax, it's really, I think, cost of living. Sorry, it's really cost of living. What we're seeing is that more households are are getting into debt earlier in terms of council tax. I think people really struggling at the moment. Wages have not been keeping up with inflation, the inflation that people feel, food inflation, etc. We know is running really high. We've discussed it quite a lot in the council tax team. It's not just in Haringey that this is being seen, it's across the board. And I think it is, utility bills have gone up, everything's gone up, and households are just finding it difficult. And as you know, in Haringey, if people are struggling, we have an ethical debt collection policy. So we will try and maximize all the benefits they're entitled to, etc. We'll do everything to try and keep them out of debt. But for people who are doing, for example, a reduction in benefits or even reduction deduction in benefits, especially, that's tiny amounts of money. So it's not, they're not paying the full amount of council tax as well. So it is just difficult. We had increased the target. So the target had been lower, and we'd increased it for this year. And I think that part of the problem is that was unrealistic. Across the board and across London, we're doing pretty well on council tax collection generally. What? That's right. So we had because we were doing really well, we thought, we increased the amount of council tax that we thought that we could deliver. But this year has just proven really difficult, and it is more people just financially more stretched is what we think. Then of course, in terms of figures, council tax have gone up. So that means that when people do default, the figures are greater. The people EFS, not EFS, sorry, the council tax reduction scheme, that's going to be more based on if council tax goes up. So it's those kinds of things as well. So as council tax goes up, the level of arrears in percentage terms, obviously that's going to go up in monetary terms, even if the percentage doesn't go up. So those are the kinds of issues that we have, and the team is doing obviously everything that we can do to increase the amount of council tax that we're collecting, but it is difficult. Sorry.
Yeah. If I was going to come in on the KPMG, but if just on the council tax. So when we set the collection rate, it isn't essentially a saving. So when to be able to set a budget each year, we have to calculate our council tax base. So that takes into account essentially the number of properties and across all the bandings, takes into account those that get CTRS and the collection rate. And then that comes up with the overall council tax base that essentially goes into our budget setting. So increasing the collection rate, yes, of course, increases the assumed collection of council tax and decreases it. But I suppose it's not a saving as such. We need to, when we're setting the council tax base, we should be trying to set a realistic assumption around collection rate. I have to say, 96%, used to be, and, I agree with Councillor Carlin, it seems to be a bit of a downward trend. Still 94%, but actually 96%, 97%, 98% used to be the typical norm. But I think since the pandemic and the cost of living, we have definitely seen, it feels like a bit of a new normal about collection rate. So just on that one. So in terms of the kind of narrative in the risk section around KPMG, so KPMG took to audit committee on the 10th of November their value for money risk assessment based on 24-25. So up until March of this year, it's their risk assessment. The final report gets published for audit committee in January. They did the same last year. And they've identified a number of risks. It's a public report. any member can go in and have a look. They identified two financials. One was around financial sustainability. We got that same recommendation last time, and I think that's the reliance on exceptional financial support. Probably not a surprise. And similar to last year, we also got a risk assessment around the delivery of savings. So if you look at, I can't remember the exact figures, but we are not close to 100% of our savings delivery. So when you set a budget, yes, there is also always some slippage. You allocate that, you have contingency for that provision, but we are delivering a lower percentage of our savings, certainly for the last 2 years that I have got some awareness on that we would want to. So they have raised that as a risk. It was up until March. I feel as though we have put more stringent processes in place for 25-26. However, you will have seen from the Q1 report, there are still a significant number of savings that are aggravated red. Now, we are putting all of our emphasis in terms of the delivery of existing savings, and that's one of the reasons why you're not seeing new savings coming forward. But it has been highlighted as a risk, and I don't want to preempt their final report, but it was highlighted in their report last year, and given we're not close to 100%, it may well be a recommendation in their full report. So, given that the whole budget is based around savings, I think it's really important. That is reported to Audit Committee, not for this committee, but I think it was an important aspect to highlight in the report.
Could I just clarify that, because what you talked about delivery of savings, and that's savings that have been identified and could turn out to be undeliverable. But what it says in this report, maybe it's slightly not worded correctly, but it doesn't talk about delivery of savings. It talks about identifying and monitoring savings.
Sorry. If you look at the audit report, it's about delivery, it's about the identification, and it is about the monitoring. So it's about all three elements. And the identification of savings is the of savings to close the budget gap, essentially. And so it is for the year 24-25 that they are doing. But the fact that we were reliant on exceptional financial support, to balance the budget for 25-26, that is an indication that we haven't identified enough savings. So it's all three elements. And I have to say, quite honestly, we have to improve on all three elements, particularly the monitoring and the delivery of savings.
So just to clarify, they're literally looking at the budget gap, seeing that not enough savings have been identified to fill that budget gap, and saying, "Oh well, that's the problem," rather than looking in more detail and saying, "Oh, there were savings there that you didn't find, that you could have identified."
It will be a bit more nuanced than how you've described. So, every audit is based on evidence. So essentially they will be looking, the financial sustainability is because we're reliant on exceptional financial support. So probably isn't a risk, is it? It's probably an issue rather than a risk at the moment. But they're particularly concerned about our ability to, not necessarily our ability to identify, but it's more our ability to kind of monitor. The delivery of savings links to the tracking of savings, doesn't it? And kind of last couple of years, we haven't been delivering close to 100%. So that's why we have got a very renowned focus on our existing savings.
Thank you. So I think I'm just wondering if around a recommendation on that last point. Now, I completely hear what you're saying about it's EFS, but when I read through KPMG's report, there did seem to be that they've highlighted a weakness in the processes and around monitoring. And to me, it was that bit that I was concerned about, because I hear what you're saying about the EFS aspect. So, but it's all about the processes. And I suppose for this committee at Scrutiny, we're scrutinising, against, the RAG rated savings, are they being delivered? Are they not being delivered? So it's around ensuring that the processes that are in place are robust enough in order to ensure that is being, the ones that are being put forward are the most effective. So I suppose it's a challenge from us as a Scrutiny committee to yourselves to say, okay, we hear what you're saying, we understand the pressures in this, but actually, if KPMG is highlighting this, then as a scrutiny committee, we probably should be scrutinising, if there's the processes in place to monitor, to identify or monitor the savings. I think that's the bit that I think it would be really helpful for us to sort of tease out a little bit more and understand from yourself how we could best do that. So it's an effective recommendation, but it's something that allows us as a committee to really get that information around the process of monitoring.
So just coming briefly, and just to clarify, and probably I didn't explain it very well, that there were two risks highlighted. One was around financial sustainability, so that's where EFS comes in, and then one was around savings. So there were two separate actually, and the savings one absolutely was about process. But for me, the two are absolutely kind of interlinked. So I mean, look, I don't want to write your recommendation for you, but just to, particularly the monitoring and the delivery, and that will come through it. So let's fast forward to council, or maybe when you see the Q2 report is a good example. When you see the in-year reports, that's when you should really be scrutinising and challenging the savings delivery. So, they've been agreed, they were agreed with budget, they were said they could be delivered. If you look at the Q1 report and then you look at the Q2 report, actually your focus as a committee is around, well, hang on, we said that we were going to deliver those savings, but at Q1, Q2, these ones are red, and therefore almost maybe it's not a recommend. I suppose that's where I think that you would have that conversation as part of the not the identification of savings, that's absolutely through the budget process, but the risks that they've highlighted around tracking and monitoring absolutely should come through there. All the panels see the quarterly monitoring now. That's where those conversations should be had.
Okay, so I suppose at this stage where we're looking at our recommendations on specific OSC related areas, that the tracker bit for that should be included in the reports. So we've got that information so we can actually challenge at this point. So I suppose the recommendation is that that's included in future reports to OSC in the areas that we're specifically looking at, if there's trackers on the monitoring of the savings. Councillor White, anything else you wanted to add? Okay, right. Actually, my colleagues have asked, these have obviously been the really good questions because I'm ticking away on my sheets of paper here. So I wanted to, okay, I suppose I was going to ask something that we've sort of skirted around a bit, but I just wanted to, I suppose for my own assurance around the where we get the line drawn in the sand. So for me, I've been looking at the figures, and there's that classic thing where we get to 5 years and we're at 192 million pounds overspend, and that your palms begin to sweat at that point, and you're thinking, wow, okay, this is an exorbitant amount of money. So from yourself, Taryn, as a finance officer, and I know this is a different world, but at what point are you expecting us as a council to be not just independently challenged and for the government to be saying, okay, that's, we're sort of having the oversight? Are you expecting to say, well, actually, guys, all councils, we want you to spend no more than 150 million pounds in EFS or something, and actually at that point then we're going to be coming down a little bit more? Or are you thinking that there's a different approach going to be happening? Because I suppose what I'm asking you is that as a Section 151 officer, you would have, even if we were £5 over budget, back in the, a few years ago, you'd have gone, nope, that's, it's not a balanced budget. So is there a point? Are you sort of getting an indication that actually they are looking and saying, okay, all councils should really have a top sort of tier in that sort of, how much we can borrow on EFS? Because as I said, as Councillor Smalls picked out, the interest rates on top of that, we're just spiralling. We'll be spiraling down at that point.
It's an overdraft, isn't it? Once you get, I'm sure I wasn't the only student in the world that had an overdraft. Once you're getting into an overdraft, it's very, very, very difficult to get out of it. So the answer to, and yeah, they haven't, and they've given no indication that they are going to set a limit on, you know, what is a total net budget that a council can have. I think it is really difficult to define that when statutory responsibilities don't change. So we still have to provide adult social care for those people that come through the door. We don't know who's coming through the door. Still have to look after children. You know, it's really difficult for them to put a limit when that hasn't changed. So, you know, there is that different conversation about, you know, temporary accommodation until those policy changes are made or something changes that we don't have a responsibility, then I think it's really difficult for them to put a limit on. And I know I've kind of mentioned this a few times, what we will need to prove to them probably through the process is that we have done everything that we can, and that's what the review will help to identify. And it might identify some things where they think we could do things differently. Then this is not the independent board. This is, you know, every authority that is in receipt of EFS will eventually get a review undertaken that's commissioned by government, and we will need to demonstrate. And so what I'm trying to do is really get ahead so that we're in a position. So I don't know when that time will be. I want us to be in a position that when we do get that question and we do get them come in and have a look at it as part of our this is not commissioners, this is as part of our EFS application, that, you know, we are doing an awful lot already, and there isn't an awful lot that they can say, actually, Haringey, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. You know, we know that there are other authorities that have probably been in EFS longer than ours, probably have greater reliance on EFS than ours. They're still providing some discretionary services, you know, so there's that whole conversation about almost local government and roles and responsibilities that need to be had. So what we, you know, what's driving our financial position is, you know, the increasing demand and the increasing price, you know, partly to some extent is beyond our control. You know, the delivery of savings is driving some of it. That is in our control. And therefore, that's why we are prioritising the things that we should be doing. You know, I don't agree that EFS is a long-term solution, but at the moment, that is the, you know, that is, but that's the reason local authorities won't be issuing a 114 to set a balanced budget, because exceptional financial support is that option. So look, all I would say is as the 151 officer, and it comes to me like the best value duty to our council taxpayers, I want to be able to assure all of us in this room, all our residents, you know, all members, that actually we're doing everything that we can. I can't categorically say that we'll never need new EFS, but I think we have a collective responsibility, led by myself, to be able to demonstrate that. If I've got any concerns that we're not doing that, then actually that is a slightly different conversation. And, you know, I don't mind sharing. This is a public meeting. You know, it's really hard, you know, that kind of my professional responsibilities and weighing up against, as you said, you weren't even allowed to be a penny over, you know, it had to be down to the penny, you know, with setting council tax. So you didn't. So we're in a very different world. But, you know, as Councillor Carlin said, there's 30 of us across the country at the moment that are in that position. I suspect the numbers are going to be significantly higher, whether it be 26, 27 or 27, 28. You know, the downside for us is that, you know, whilst we do the bigger changes that are needed, or the bigger ideas generation that's needed, we haven't got the reserves to smooth us out, whereas some other authorities are probably taking a very, very similar approach to ours, but they've actually not requiring EFS because they might have reserves that they can just smooth things out over the next couple of years. So look, it's a really hard dilemma. I kind of have a dilemma with myself every single day. I think, you know, all the time that we are, as a council, trying to do everything that we can to get to a better financial position, I think that's what allows me to kind of demonstrate that I feel that I'm certainly meeting my statutory responsibilities. If that's helpful.
Thank you. And so my final question is on, it's at 11.9 about the focus budget position on page 73. It says that it's about the 2.3 million overspend in strategic property services. And it talks about the commercial estate, and it's talking about the extensive work, reviewing the portfolio and review of leases and rent reviews, which is leading to increased income. So I'm going to finish. That's really positive. We're getting that increased income. The question I'm going to ask is, why didn't we do this? And I have got some knowledge from many, many years ago when I do know that there was an issue around us not understanding so much about our commercial portfolio and our, the rent income that we needed to bring in, and the review of leases. So has there been any look at why this wasn't done years ago, and actually what have we learned from that? Because you are obviously doing, you're getting that income, which is brilliant. How much more work is there left to go?
So property is within my portfolio, so I'm definitely talking about a service that's with me. So we have had a property improvement plan in place for, I think we're now in our second year. So this was on the back of a review that took place, I think 3 or 4 years ago. So the improvement plan is in place. I think probably the pace of delivery probably hasn't been as quick as we have wanted to. I've got really good visibility of that service now. There is still an awful lot of work for us to do. So kind of backdated, rent reviews, lease reviews, there's a backlog there. We are doing our absolute best to try and get those all up to date, but it is a significant piece of work. I'm not going to put an exact timescale on it, but I suppose for me, I think we're seeing an absolutely improved position. And I should say, actually, in the monitoring that you will see, the income, this is about our commercial property estate. And I should emphasize this, it's not about our community estate. This is absolutely about our commercial property estate. I think the latest figures are, we're bringing in 500,000 more than what we were this time last year. The complexity of the portfolio. So we took a long time really trying to understand the portfolio, and some of this was before my time. So, I have absolutely caught up on some of the history. There was we perhaps didn't know our commercial estate as well as what we should have done. The liabilities, the bills, the income, out-of-date rent reviews, lease reviews, etc. So, it's a fairly significant estate. The team are working at, they're almost going as quickly as they possibly can. But there is quite a significant piece of work to do. So, look, I don't want to put timescales on, but, I think you will still be asking me this question next year, if I'm honest. But hopefully what I'll be doing is reporting a significantly improved position. There is something for me about, collecting the income that's due to us. And so that for me, certainly working with the service, that for me is a priority over the next 6 months to see where we are. So, and I suppose that is probably a really good example of, we are not coming forward with we did 2 rounds of savings, didn't we, last year? We're not proposing to come around with a new set of savings proposals, kind of this, as part of this budget process. But the looking for efficiencies and the collection of our income doesn't stop. So I might be presenting a slightly different or slightly improved position to you when you see the final draft budget at your meeting in January, because actually I think when I talked about the pressure on the corporate landlord model, there is work that we are still doing in between. And I think our commercial property portfolio is a really good example whereby actually we might have got 3 more reviews, and therefore it might be an improved position. So there is, Councillor Connor, that's a long-winded way of saying, there is an improvement plan in place. It's scrutinised extensively by audit committee. We are making good progress, but we've still got a way to go. I think that's an honest and open
So just because I've been interested in this for many, many years, and I am talking quite a number now, you know, there was always that challenge. Why aren't we doing this? So it's excellent news to hear, and I am pleased we're finishing on that sort of positive. I think the recommendation is that we do keep an eye on this because it is under OSC. It does fall within our remit, and I think this is an area of potentially growth, obviously, because you have just said about 500,000. And I think that sort of focus in on those areas and actually really getting the money that is owed to the council is huge. So I would ask that would be a recommendation. Councillor Small.
But I just had a potential little asterisk, and it may be out of date, but this is one of the areas that the government encouraged local authorities to look at AI and tech and investment in digital technology that is able to effectively improve the process of people going through old leases of 20 years ago, et cetera, to be able to unlock this. And just whether there's a recommendation to encourage officers to explore whether there is a digital piece of work there which can help unlock future changes.
Apologies, Councillor Small. I realise we're hitting 10 o'clock, so I just have to stop and what's the formal word? Thank you very much, Councillor Small. I'm going to add that in as well. Sorry, this is a bit funny. So unless anyone else has got any further recommendations, we are coming to the end of this agenda item. So thank you, officers in the room, for all the, you know, I can't even think of the word now, I'm too tired, but challenge that we've put to you tonight and the scrutiny. And if we could get the tracker in for the December meeting, that would be helpful, and we'll decide whether to take it December or January, depending on what we see on the tracker. So thank you very much to officers, and thanks to the panel, because it went on a tad up. It is always hard to do budget in 2 hours. So I'm now going to hand straight back to Councillor White.
Thanks. Yeah, we've just got a couple of very brief items, hopefully, to go through before we finish the meeting. So item 9, this is a scrutiny review for the Adults and Health Scrutiny Panel on communication with residents.
Agreed.
It's the work programme. We're meeting again on the 10th of December. I mean, you know, we're going to be looking at the Q2 outturn. Just to note that that's the only substantive item on the agenda for that meeting now. So there's space on our agenda to pick up any issues arising from the Q1 corporate delivery part date, or anything from this evening's meeting. I would suggest that if anyone has anything on that, particularly on the corporate delivery plan, or if there's anything from this evening, to send that by email to Dominic tomorrow, if possible, because we're very much approaching the it's very close, the meeting. Okay, there's no new items of urgent business. Next meeting is Wednesday, the 10th of December. So I'll see you then.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Vice Chair and Chair for tonight.
I was going to say, as you closed it, that was your meeting. So the fact we went on past 10 is not my fault.